Ladies and gentlemen, recorded in Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada. It's time for Fight Night Picks with your hosts, Craig and Matt Allen.
What a card we have coming up this weekend. UFC 259, 3 big-time title fights, and 4 titleists in this one, Matt. We have a great card. As always, one half, your co-hosting duo at Craig Allen, FNP. You can find me there on Twitter and Instagram. You can find Matt at Matt Allen, FNP. And as always, at Fight Night Picks, the discount double take. You can find us over there. And Matt, we're always active on the social medias. We have question mark kicks coming up, as always, 2 hours before the prelims on Saturday. And Matt, where this is a pay-per-view, we're going to have the Fight Night Picks Fight Companion live when the main card starts over there on pay-per-view. Matt, I mean, how excited are you for this card? We have such a star-studded one. You don't really have to think too much as far as the debuting fighters. You have Carlos Ulberg and Uros. But overall, an awesome night of fights on tap.
This card is absolutely stacked top to bottom. And I know we're coming off a fight card that, let's be honest, it didn't really deliver and there was only 9 fights on it. There are 15 phenomenal fights slated for this weekend. And again, you have Jan Blachowicz fighting Israel Adesanya. If Adesanya wins that fight and is able to be double champ, and let's say calls out John Jones afterwards, that's going to be on Twitter, on Instagram, hell, that'll be on the news the next day. So I really do think Adesanya has a chance this weekend to become one of those McGregor-level stars. Now, he might never reach the heights that McGregor did, but he's going to be the face of MMA really any day now, and probably after Saturday. Amanda Nunes, the female goats, fighting. You've got Petr Yan, who I truly do believe by the end of his run in the UFC will be considered one of those all-time great kind of fighters. Thiago Santos, Aleksandar, Rakic. And here's the thing. Kyler Phillips, my hair goals, is fighting Song Yadong, and I'm so excited for that fight. It's one that it's going a little bit unnoticed because there are a lot of other big names on this card, but Yadong's been in there with some of the top guys at 135. And for Kyler Phillips, an extremely exciting style, and if he is able to break his way into the top 15, we always like to talk about how bantamweight and lightweight really are the two most stacked divisions right now in the UFC, and Kyler Phillips is one of those kind of dark horses on the outside of the top 15, who I really do think with 1 or 2 big wins can get a lot more fan appeal.
And for Kyler Phillips, he needs a win here too. I mean, his last opponent, Cameron Ellis, is coming in on short notice, relative unknown, and he breezed through him. And then his previous opponent, Gabriel Silva, actually just released by the UFC. So the Forever Prospects brother just released. But overall, again, Matt, really exciting card. Ulberg and Nzechukwu. You've got Matthews, Brady, and then again, on that main card. I mean, how can really anybody forget about Thiago Santos taking on Aleksandar Rakic? There's so much to be excited about, Matt. We have a lot of time to talk about all 15 fights. So you know what we'll do? We'll throw it over to our Fight of the Night screen, as always presented by our favorite sponsors, Manscaped. When we're talking Fight of the Night, how can you not consider our bantamweight title fight as a possibility for Fight of the Night? I mean, Matt, look at these two guys. Petr Yan, a guy that's undefeated so far in his UFC career, 15-1 overall, and he's taken on a very strong level of competition the whole way up. If you go back and watch his fights with ACB, it was against the cream of the cream over there. Since he's come into the UFC, plenty of performance bonuses, plenty of very big statement wins. Jose Aldo, Uriah Faber, Jimmy Rivera, just some of the names that he's faced so far. And you talk about a knife through hot butter. Petr Yan, the way that he fights, so cerebral, but such a fun style. And opposite him, a guy coming out of Long Island, and Aljamain Sterling. Wrestling background, but do we really get to see the wrestling? Because his striking's so dynamic. His jiu-jitsu is so slippery. I mean, you look at his Sulev stretch win that he had not that long ago. Such an exciting fighter. And Matt, if we focus on, the last fights out of both of these guys, for Aljamain Sterling, Corey Sandhagen, sink! There's the choke. And for Petr Yan, his last time out, he beats the legend Jose Aldo to win the belt. Two amazing fighters. Maybe stylistically they're not the same, but they should produce a great fight in the night here.
I agree 100%. Here's the great thing about both fighters. You could say Aljamain Sterling, yes, he's kind of a grappling specialist, if you will. When he gets to fight to the mat, he's so good at jiu-jitsu. Yan, he's the boxing specialist, if you will. Let's be honest, these guys can do everything, and that's what makes this fight so fun. Aljamain Sterling, like you had said, wrestling background, absurd at jiu-jitsu, and he really is... People don't talk about Aljamain Sterling's grappling enough, I don't think. And I'll go more in depth, of course, when you do the actual prediction. But Sterling, every second you're on the mat with him, you are in danger. He can grab a leg, an arm, your neck. No matter what you give him, he can submit you. For Petr Yan, he's got 2 modes, and it's kind of like Yoel Romero. He can be defensive, he can be offensive, but no matter what mode he ends up bringing to the table, it's going to result in fireworks. Go back to the Jose Aldo fight. Yes, the stoppage was a little bit disgusting, but Petr Yan beat Jose Aldo in basically a pure boxing fight, southpaw the whole time. Petr Yan's an orthodox fighter, and he outboxed one of the better boxers in the UFC, so I just think both these guys are going to produce such a fun fight, and whoever wins this fight, I really do think is going to keep this title for a long time. I think we really are dealing with the two best bantamweights in the division right now, and yes, the Corey Sandhagens are going to have something to say about it, and there are a lot of other fun fighters in this division, but these two guys, I personally think, are head and shoulders above the rest.
Should be a great fight, Matt. I mean, we have 15 total fights, so it's pretty easy to pick a possible fight of the night. But let's keep it in the division and throw it to our other possible fight of the night. And Matt, when we talk about fun stylistic matchups, you know, normally we talk, oh, it's a clash of styles. It's a striker's paradise, a grappler's paradise. We have two strikers, but they do it in totally different ways. We have China's Song Yadong coming in here against Kyler Phillips. And for Kyler Phillips, he's got the long hair. He's got the circular glasses at weigh-ins. He's having a good time. And he flows when he fights. He's switching stances. He'll throw weird kind of kung fu moves almost with his kicks. He's very unorthodox, but at the end of the day, he gets the job done. He's a very clinical striker, and his ground game and his wrestling are incredibly underrated. And I know if you want to go back, his fight against Gabriel Silva, he just totally outclassed him in that one. Looked worlds above Cameron Nelson his last fight. But those opponents are near the level of a Song Yadong, a guy that's trained heavily at Team Alpha Male in the past, a guy that really has crisp boxing and incredible technique. For Song Yadong, some of the best striking, just pure striking that we can see in this division.
Oh, yeah.
I know we're talking Sterling, we're talking Jan, we're talking Rivera, Munoz. Like, there's great strikers in this division. Song Yadong has to be considered among them. For Kyler Phillips, if he wins this fight, boom, you're right on that radar. And even though he's creative and a little funky in the cage, if he can get a win here, holy smokes, it sets him up big time for this division.
Oh, 100%. Kind of both guys' nicknames say everything. Kyler Phillips, the Matrix. He kind of fights like he's in one. There is this sort of... It's a flow to the way that Kyler Phillips fights, and that's what's so exciting about him fighting these upper echelon guys, because I will admit, he hasn't faced anyone near the level of competition that Song Yadong is going to bring into the cage. And we talk about the striking of Yadong. The straight shots are really important because he can connect from so far away. He's got great hand speed too, and really both these guys are accurate, even though they are different types of strikers, and that's what makes this really fun. It will be interesting because Song Yadong... Listen, I'm not an MMA conspiracy theorist or anything. You could argue he lost his last two fights, and I really do think he needs a win, because you look at the Vera fight, it was a very close fight, and I understand he got the win, but a lot of people thought Vera won that fight. The Cody Stamann draw, Cody Stamann gonna Cody Stamann. He's gonna take you down 13 times and hold you there, but when you're on the feet, you will have success, and that was just one of those fights. So we're finally going to see Yadong in there with another guy who is just gonna stand up and strike with him, and I think that is the perfect matchup.
Very, very close odds in this one as well. It should be a great fight. Striker's paradise. You're not going to want to miss that one, Matt. And as always, our Fight of the Night screen presented by Manscaped. Head on over to the website, manscaped.com. Use promo code FNP. You get 20% off and free shipping on your order. I'll talk about my balls and the fragrances I use at home later on in the show. But Matt, these two fights should definitely deliver. 15 fight card, absolutely stacked. It's going to be a great one. Those are great options for Fight of the Night. We're really looking forward to it. This is a great card. And if this is the first time you're tuned in with Fight Night Picks, Matt, the loser from last weekend has to take a shot of Poirier's Louisiana-style hot sauce from Dustin Poirier and the Heartbeat Hot Sauce Company up here in Canada. Now, no, it's not a sponsor like Manscaped is. And yes, I really actually like the taste of this.
Good.
Don't want to shoot it and lose it, but Matt, let's do it. Let's get in the camera. Here we go. Here we go.
Wow, guys. Craig, how excited are you right now? Be honest.
I'm not excited at all.
That's unfortunate.
All right, we're going to fill it up to...
Oh, goodness. Yeah, he's getting a good amount there, folks. All right.
All right, here we go. You ready?
Yeah.
Bottoms up.
Chunky.
Oh, boy.
All right.
That's a commitment for you. Fight Night Picks. Fight Night Picks on Instagram and Twitter. Matt, as we always say, with Fight Night Picks, let's get into it. Kicking off the card at bantamweight, we have a lot of great bantamweight fights on this card. Really, you could call this UFC 259, and if they still gave pay-per-views names, it would be Bantamweight Showcase. We have 5-star Trevin Jones looking to capitalize on his UFC debut. Now, if you look at his record, it says no contest. He popped for the weed. He took a fight on 2 days' notice against Russia's Timur Valiev, and he looked absolutely amazing in that fight. Well, scratch that. He looked pretty bad in the first round. He didn't look great in the second round, and when Valiev took his foot off the gas for 1 second, Jones does one thing incredibly well. If you go back and watch a lot of his fights before he came into the UFC, it's just his check right hook. He's a great southpaw, check right hook, throws good leg kicks too. If it's his lead leg, he throws a nice calf kick. If it's his outside leg, he lands a nice thigh kick. So he does a lot of things very well. Doesn't really have the greatest in defensive wrestling. He can get taken down fairly easily. He pops back up to his feet. And if you want to see a really good Trevin Jones win, you should go back and watch his fight against Takafumi Otsuka with Deep. And that was almost 2 years ago now. But it's a fight where, very similar to the fight with Valiev, Jones gets backed up. He lands that check hook, check hook, check hook. He keeps throwing it out there. Kind of like you saw Magomed Ankalaev do last weekend against Nikita Krylov. So he kind of spams the check hook, and then he will go for those kicks. If he gets taken down, and this is the key, in that fight that he had against Otsuka, he gets into this weird rear naked choke position against the cage. He's on his side. Really, the commentary team goes, oh, well, there's not much of a submission in this. And doesn't Trevin Jones get a rear naked choke out of it? And it was very, very tight. So for Trevin Jones, somewhat a low output, fairly decent power, not the best wrestler, pretty sneaky jiu-jitsu, a guy fighting out of Guam. You don't see a ton of fighters from Guam. I mean, Roque Martinez, one of the guys that broke out last year as well with the UFC. But just looking at the level of competition of guys that Trevin Jones has taken on that regional scene. I mean, Toby Misek is one of those names for sure, and you can go up and down through the list of fighters that you probably recognized in the past. He had a big win over Mehdi Baidulayev at ACA 91. It was another choke finish there. If you want to go back and check that one out, it's another one where he probably wasn't supposed to win the fight. He was coming in on off of 2 losses, both of them by split decision. But overall, Trevin Jones, very complete fighter, I would say.
Would you say he's a 5-star player?
A few holes in his game. He's probably like a 3 or 4 tool player if we're talking baseball. But overall, serviceable guy. He can get it done. Mario Bautista's been out for about a year or so. I'll let you kind of take over. This guy, Phoenix Rising, I mean, the one loss to Corey Sandhagen, you take it for what it's worth. He had some successes. I know it ended in the first round. It was an armbar. He had a flying knee knockdown against him early on. He was able to get some takedowns. And then he just kind of got into that armbar. It looked like a Kimura. Sandhagen really kind of cinched it up into an armbar. But since then, performance of the night bonus against Miles Johns. He had a fight of the night against Jinsu San. And it's just kind of unfortunate that we haven't seen Mario Bautista since that win back in February last year.
I couldn't agree more. And Mario Bautista is the type of fighter who, I'm not saying stylistically he's a nightmare for Trevin Jones, but the way I always look at the Trevin Jones fight is, can you mix it up with him? Because I agree exactly with what you said. His takedown defense isn't great, but he can get back up to his feet, and that's going to be an issue for him throughout really just all of the 135-pound division, because there's so many really good wrestlers who can box with you on the feet, who aren't such a liability in their striking where, oh, when I'm on the feet with them, I might be able to catch them. I'm not saying Trevin Jones can't go out there and catch Mario Bautista with a big shot. He's been able to do that in the past. But Mario Bautista, he is that fighter who can mix it up and keep Trevin Jones thinking the whole time. Because for Trevin Jones, when you do know that your takedown defense isn't that great, you're going to constantly not want to let your hands fly. Because when you do let your hands go, you're going to be worried about getting taken down. And it's not that Bautista's this absolute insane wrestler or anything, but he's good enough at every facet of mixed martial arts that he can always bring in and kind of do the opposite of what you do well. And that's what makes Mario Bautista so dangerous in the division. And the Jinsu San fight is a fun one to bring up, because you look at Jinsu San's career. First of all, Petr Yan in your UFC debut, no favors there, but he's only fought killers. Well, he's only fought 2 killers.
He's very much the new age Tyrion Ware.
Thank you. That is a great example. And he's only been in there with really tough guys. And Mario Bautista, he just showed a really diverse skill set in that fight. And then you go into the Miles Johns fight, and listen, Miles Johns, he's a good fighter, but ceiling-wise, you just don't know how to really place him. What a beautiful finish by Mario Bautista. And I do think, I'm not going to say he's going to win by flying knee, but I do think the fact that he can threaten the takedown and also come up with knees up the middle is going to give Trevin Jones a lot of issues. And Trevin Jones, he doesn't back up like Tyron Woodley to the cage, but sometimes he can find himself not in poor positions in the cage, but you can tell that his cage awareness isn't always there. And if Bautista can get some forward pressure, really back up Trevin Jones, I do see him really unloading with his striking. Because, like you had mentioned, Trevin Jones, the things he does well on the feet, he does do quite well, but it's very limited. He does have the check hook. He does have the left straight. He does have a few varieties of leg kicks. But after that, you don't really have to worry about that much. It's not exactly like Luke Rockhold, but I always think of Luke Rockhold when I think of this. He's a great striker, but look at what Luke Rockhold does. He only really does 3 things. He throws a left straight, he throws a check right hook, and just a lot of left leg kicks. after you can sort of figure out how to control those components, I think those are beatable fighters. And I think Mario Bautista is the type of guy who does have a diverse enough skill set that you can go out there and just keep Trevin Jones thinking throughout the fight.
I mean, with Mario Bautista, this is a guy coming out of MMA Lab. You have 3 fighters out of MMA Lab this weekend. You have Bautista, you have Kyler Phillips, and you have the man himself, Casey Kenney. Big fight coming up against Dominick Cruz at bantamweight on this card. 3 big bantamweights all training together. But the thing that I like out of him, he has a wrestling base, and he's a guy that had the opportunity to pursue a wrestling scholarship in college and instead focus full-time on MMA. And it's very interesting to see Bautista progress through his striking, because you know how good the wrestling is, and his ground game's very adept as well. The other thing about that flying knee that we saw in his last fight against Miles Johns, he showed it at 20 seconds, he showed it at 1:21, he showed it at 25 seconds, and 3:26 of the second round. He kept going for it, and every time he went for it, you could hear his corner yell, "Oh, good job, great awareness." Like, it was just very interesting because you knew that was a game plan from Bautista from the jump. The other thing that he does really well, if you throw a lot of kicks, he'll grab them. He did it against Corey Sandhagen to force it into a takedown. He's probably going to do it. If Trevin Jones goes for that back leg to land on the thigh, I would expect Mario Bautista to try and catch it and take him down.
Now, I do have a question for you. Do you think the layoff will affect Bautista a lot? Because he is younger in his career. And I know, listen, MMA rust or ring rust, whatever you want to call it, it does affect different fighters differently. So I'm just curious to get your take. Do you think the year layoff will affect him?
Well, that's the thing. If you look at Mario Bautista, 3 fights in 2017, 3 fights in 2018. In 2019, he was out there twice. In 2020, he was out there once. So really, it's one of the longer layoffs that we've seen from him. Hopefully it doesn't. It looks from the Instagrams and the social medias of the world that he's really been out there training. He's been in the gym. And again, MMA Lab, how can you go wrong? I mean, you talk about more and more great fighters coming out.
Well, yeah, like you had mentioned, there's 2 other fighters just on this card from that camp. All week long, he is going to have those guys to still help him get better throughout the fight week. So I think that's a great point to bring up.
The one other thing about this, and we didn't really talk about it, and it's a good question about, well, he's been off for so long. Mario Bautista is actually taking this fight on 16 days' notice. Originally, it was supposed to be Trevin Jones, and you don't mess with the Zohan, Randy Costa. Costa out of this fight, Bautista taking it on short notice. I still like it as a short notice fight for Bautista. So, Matt, let's talk about the Tapology votes. We'll get into the odds as well. Over on Tapology, 1,122 total votes, 83% Bautista, 73% by decision. If we have a look at the odds, Bautista actually one of the bigger movers and shakers this week. Open to -130, now to -237. For Trevin Jones, open to +110. He's now to +190. Are you surprised by any of that?
Not really. And again, it comes down to the mix-up ability, I guess, of Mario Bautista and just the diversity of his MMA skill set. And here's the thing. I know we're talking about Mario Bautista like he can go out there and probably compete with Corey Sandhagen next week. But no, these are unranked bantamweights who do have decent ceilings. Like if Mario Bautista goes out there and finishes Trevin Jones in an impressive way, I'm not saying a ranked fighter is next, but he is going to move his way up quite a bit. Like, when you do have a card like this, I know Craig and I differ on this, but I'm going to kind of reference the Cyril Gane-Jairzinho fight. When you are placed on a card like this, and this is a massive pay-per-view and there's going to be a lot of eyes on it, if you're a guy like Mario Bautista who can go out there and have a very impressive finish, it means a lot for your career, not just inside the UFC, but endorsement-wise. Just all the notoriety that comes with having an impressive performance on a big card. We heard Amanda Hebos talk about that when she was on the McGregor-Poirier card. Now, it didn't turn out well for her, but it is something that I do think younger fighters kind of bring in when they are on a bigger fight card that, okay, there is a little bit more pressure on me, and if Bautista is able to go out there and win impressively, I really do see him fighting up into those top like 25 to 15 guys next.
And I mean, we've really kind of set it up a certain way the entire time. And listen, Trevin Jones, again, he can go out there, that check hook, you got to watch out for it. You got to watch out for knees up the middle. Same thing with Bautista. The thing that I really like about Mario Bautista, and this skill set could really get accentuated in the Jinsu Sun fight, so it's a little tricky, his output went up in that fight against a really tricky fighter. So in that one, in terms of total strikes, he went 38, 64, 77. Normally you go like, 45, 46, 47. You don't go up by about 20 more every
Unless
time.
you max all the way.
I really do like all of that out of Bautista. I like his skill set in this one, and even on short notice, I like Mario Bautista in this fight.
I couldn't agree more. Again, this is going to be a phenomenal fight, and the fact that this is the first fight on the prelims is kind of surprising, because I do have really high hopes for this, but yeah, I've got Mario Bautista.
Matt, both of us going with the MMA Labs, Mario Bautista to get the win. It should be a great card. 3 title fights. Nunes taking on Anderson. You've got a big one in the main event. You got Jan Blachowicz taking on Adesanya. In this division, the Bautista-Jones division, we've got Jan taking on Sterling. So keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt, as we always say. Let's get into it. Very interesting fight at lightweight between a couple of prospects. We have Serbia's own Uros taking on Aalon Cruz. And listen, I'm sure there's people out there from Serbia that are absolutely going to butcher me on the name pronunciation. I went back and watched all of Uros' fights. Very interesting stuff. So he comes at us from Alaska FC. He had his first 5 fights over there. He debuted at middleweight, had 4 fights at welterweight, and then his last fight over on Contender Series at 155 pounds. He comes into this one at lightweight as well. Every single win's been pretty well a knockout, and that's the thing. I mean, the guy gets it done in a lot of different ways. He's one of those fighters that has a very long stance, and you'll see that. He's going to be one of the bigger lightweights you're ever going to see out there. And oh, by the way, so's Aalon Cruz. Very, very large frames. Both these guys over 6 feet tall. You're going to have a big reach advantage for Aalon Cruz, but the thing is, he rarely ever uses it. That's the trouble. In MMA, we always see the reach stat. I'm guilty of it. You see it up there on the screen in front of you as we bob around between graphics. Hopefully you like the third graphic with the losses in there now. But overall, for Aalon Cruz, doesn't really throw his hands at time because he almost uses his kicks as a jab, which is strange to say. But he has a very odd stance. It's almost like a Machida if he's going to move forward.
It's like Ryan Hall.
It's kind of like Ryan Hall, too, where he throws a jabbing kick. He'll throw it to your head. He'll throw it to your body. Front kick, teep kick. He'll invest in the legs a little bit. He has a nice left high kick as well. And for Uros, the trouble for me is he comes into this fight, and you look at the level of competition that he had with Alaska FC. I've compared Alaska FC to a lot of different things. They're kind of like the WLF wars of, well, that one state that's super north and super west of all the other ones, because you had no idea what you're going to get. WLF wars, who have we gotten out of there? Well, you've had what? Song Yadong that's on this card, and then you've had other fighters that have been just absolutely hot garbage. Like, it's really hard to tell. Level of competition's not all that great. For Uros, if you want to see a really fun fight and some of the dynamic movements that he can do, go back and watch the fight against Alonzo, and this is a tough last name, but Alonzo Leesholm Jr., and he does a crazy Granby roll in that one. But overall, he outmatched his competition big time when he was on the regional scene. And then if you look at his last fight against Mikey Gonzalez was kind of small for the fight, and he moved up a weight class, so they had said on the broadcast. He was a karate guy, so he's spinning a lot of, spinning kicks and missing on them and getting tired, and it just looked like a total mismatch of a fight to me. For Aalon Cruz, the last time we saw him out there, well, he decided, you know what, 155 pounds was cool and everything, and I should probably fight there during my career, which he did in the past. And he was at featherweight, and then he fought Steve Wynn, and he won that fight. And then he was at featherweight, and he fought Spike Carlisle. Hey, big guy, don't fight at featherweight. You're too big for featherweight. He beat Steve Wynn at featherweight, and again, a lot of his fights over his career have been at featherweight, but the trouble is he's way too big for the weight class. Hopefully this helps him out a lot. He was supposed to take on originally Steven Peterson last year. Peterson fell out. He gets that Carlisle fight, and his hype train got totally derailed there.
It really did. And Spike Carlisle, he's a wonky fighter. Here's the thing. He could beat a guy in the top 15, maybe, and he could also lose to half the guys running in the
And you'll
UFC.
probably see him in Bellator next, really.
You probably will, which is wild about Spike Carlisle, because again, you never really know what you're going to get from Carlisle, and that's why I always find it hard to kind of base a prediction off of someone who's fought Spike Carlisle. And Aalon Cruz does have other fights to go off of. It's just that one in particular, I always find it difficult, just because, again, Spike Carlisle, is he going to knock you out in the first round, or is he going to get extremely tired and just be real wonky the whole time? For Uros, I think this is going to be an interesting fight for him, and I think this isn't a setup fight for him, but I do think the UFC is more invested in the future of Medic than they are the future of Aalon Cruz. And here's the thing. Coming out from AFC, you can either be Jared Cannonier, fight at a bunch of different weight classes, be amazing. I know he lost to Whitaker, but Whitaker's one of the better fighters in the UFC.
Or Justin Buchholz.
Or it could be Justin Buchholz, Gina Mazzani, we could throw her in there. There's just such a mixed bag coming from that promotion that it really is hard to kind of place their ceiling. And here's the honest truth. You can say that about any organization outside the UFC.
We saw, again, a guy that was with Fight Night Picks, did an interview with Fight Night Picks not that long ago, Adrian Yanez. He took on an Alaska FC guy that looked great in his fights, and Victor Rodriguez. And then, listen, Yanez is very good. Rodriguez wasn't all that great, but it was the same thing. Like, you watch the fight tape, and it kind of scares you a little bit.
It does a little bit. But here's the thing. In this fight, I don't think Medic is going to face any of those issues that we think might be there in the future. I haven't seen him fight that upper echelon wrestler at 155. He's going to have to do that at some point. This is just a great kind of introduction to the UFC audience. And I know I said it on the first video how, oh, these young fighters, they realize that there is more pressure. For Medic, I think the pressure's there, but the fact that he is fighting someone who stylistically will be in front of him, not to be hit because he can keep the fight at such a range with his kicks that he won't always be so hittable. But if you're Medic, constant pressure will win you this fight eventually. You're not going to get to him after that first punch. You might not hit him on the second punch, but as long as you throw in combination and really make sure that you are dedicated to that third, fourth, fifth strike in your combination, you will eventually get to Aalon Cruz, because for Cruz, he has this terrible habit of backing straight up. He doesn't exit on an angle. And good example, Kevin Croom when he fought Alex Caceres. Caceres did a great job of not just backing up when he was defending takedowns. He would defend the takedown, dig the underhook, but he would get his back off the cage. He would never just let himself get forced all the way back. For Cruz, it's kind of like that in the striking department, where he will move from side to side, but if you are aggressive enough, he will just concede space and put his back up against the cage.
Now, he's a guy, Aalon Cruz, that was based out of Tampa. He's been an Extreme Couture, and from all accounts, he's been there for a while, training with the likes of the Dan Iges of the world and others, and that's one of those things. You're training with a guy like Ige, you're working your stand-up with like a Maki Pitolo. I think that really bodes well for a fight like this against a guy like Uros Medic that we see when Medic really needs to bring everything together. Again, wrestling's not his super strong suit. He's an all-right grappler. We see him out of Anchorage BJJ, or he's been billed out of there in the past. He's a guy that has a lot of tools. I just need to see them in this one. And again, for Aalon Cruz, and I had mentioned it earlier, featherweight, lightweight, whatever, you go back and look at his record. Just about every fight's been at featherweight. So again, I like it at 55. I like it out of Extreme Couture for this one. Just the plot thickens here.
It really does. And last thing on Medic, I don't know if he's going to be in the top 15. I don't know if he's going to be at lightweight for the rest of his career, because you had mentioned it. He's fought from middleweight down. Aalon Cruz is the opposite. He's meeting him at lightweight from featherweight. So I'm not, again, these are two of the bigger guys in the division, although Cruz is moving up, but it will be interesting just to see the physicality of these two and how it does match up. And for Cruz, if he's getting backed up to the cage, great point with the Extreme Couture, he might shoot a takedown. That could be a wrinkle that we're starting to see in Aalon Cruz's fights, because when your back's against the cage, you really only have two choices. You can go left, you can go right, or you're going to have to shoot a takedown to go forward. I'm not saying that's something that we're going to see in this fight of wrestling heavy Aalon Cruz, but it is a wrinkle that he might have added into this game plan, because if you're up against a guy like Medic, standing at distance is not the best way to beat him. You are really going to have to make this an ugly fight throughout. And if Aalon Cruz can make this an ugly fight, I think he'd have a better chance of winning. But the issue is, you can't really clinch your opponent if you're at kicking range. And that's the problem. Cruz doesn't have a get-out-of-jail-free card in this fight. His get-out-of-jail-free card is, well, I can stand at range, I can kick, I can throw combination, I can out-volume you, and I can frustrate you with my speed, and maybe you might walk into a big shot that way. But Medic is such a high-level striker that I really just don't see him getting frustrated throughout this fight.
And that's the thing. I mean, you look at Uros Medic, a guy out of Serbia, training in Anchorage, and then here's the last wrinkle of it. So I talked about Aalon Cruz switched up his camp. He's been with Extreme Couture. Uros Medic hasn't been training at Anchorage BJJ. He's been training at Kings. So he's working with Kelvin Gastelum, Benil Dariush. You see all of these guys in the Instagrams. You see that his manager's Ali Abdelaziz.
Rafael Cordero, though.
You know how things are working out. He's got Rafael Cordero as well. I really like those wrinkles in there for the exact same reasons. If you want to take a guy like Uros Medic and really start to polish him up, like a Giga Chikadze, who's got a big fight coming up here shortly against, who is it?
Cub Swanson.
Cub Swanson. There we go. I was going to say Barboza, but he just had a fight booked as
Cub.
well. For Uros Medic, I like all of those. The other things that I want to talk about, really long stance, that can be tricky against a guy like Cruz. It could also work to your benefit because, again, with Cruz, if you're a guy that's coming in square in front of him, well, he throws those teep kicks, he throws those front kicks, so he can really kind of work the distance and really discourage you from moving forward. But with Medic, if he's walking in with a really long stance, if he's throwing kicks of his own, it could work out well for him too. And the other thing, he has half-decent boxing, but the one thing that I love out of Uros Medic, there's one other fighter on this card that I think does an excellent job because he's a champion, Petr Yan. What does Petr Yan do very, very well? When he gets somebody hurt or when he goes to throw a combination, he'll work his hands and he'll either end with a hook to the body or normally it's a kick to the body. For Uros Medic, he does the same thing. Not as fast, but he does do the same thing where if he gets you hurt or if he's really starting to land well and starting to flow, he'll start to invest in the body to slow down his opponent. We saw Aalon Cruz where he got finished by Carlisle. It was just kind of quick and it was pretty much over. Carlisle was on top hammering away after he really hit him heavy. For Medic, if this is going to be a long, drawn-out fight, there's a lot of wrinkles in there that I like for the Serbian fighter here.
I couldn't agree more. I think this is a phenomenal fight, and really, the winner of this should get... Again, it's hard to say, especially in lightweight, but the winner of this should get one of those like kind of veterans who are on their way out. That would be ideal. Especially,
Nick Lentz.
Yeah, like a Nick. Oh, he's retired, so probably not a good idea. But maybe like
Jim
one of
Miller.
those, yeah, like Jim Miller's the name that always comes up, or a Clay Guida-esque. Because I really do think for Medic, when we talk about prospects who have really high ceilings, and when you mention the body shot, who else does that almost to perfection? Elliott. We talk about him probably more than anyone else, mainly because with his boxing style in MMA, yes, he's great at wrestling, yes, he is the total package, he goes through the body, and he will seek it out too. And if you're a guy who can get tired in a fight, those body shots are your worst nightmare. They're basically your kryptonite. So I really like Medici in this fight, and I'd love to see just where he is going to be at lightweight, and really if he's even going to stay at lightweight throughout his career.
I was surprised by the odds, Matt, because for Medici opened up a plus 105 underdog. He's now at a minus 171, one of the bigger movers and shakers this week. For Aalon, Cruz opened a minus 125, now at a plus 141. Let's look at the Tapology votes. Holy smokes. 1,265 total votes, 90% Medici and 74% by knockout. And if you're wondering, hey guys, you look too much into the Tapology votes, this, that, and the other thing, we don't look before the videos now, so it's as big of a surprise to you as it is to me. I'm sticking with Medici here. I mean, I tipped my hand a little early. Again, I like Cruz out of Extreme Couture. Maybe if he starts to work in a little bit of the wrestling, I think he could have success. That's the thing. To beat Medici, there's ways to do it. You got to be a fairly good wrestler, a fairly good grappler. And once Medici faces that, he's probably going to have a really hard time. Maybe Cruz hits him with something crazy like he did in that Wynn fight. I mean, against Stephen Wynn, listen, Steven was pressing forward, throwing the hands. He was really landing well. And then right at the end, Cruz threw an awesome strike that really just kind of made it night-night. So I still like this for Medici. There's definitely an opportunity for Cruz, but I really do like Medici in this one.
Listen, when I saw the odds had Medici as the underdog to begin with, now he's almost a 2-1 favorite. The odds are kind of trending in that direction. I thought the Tapology picks would be pretty close. I thought there'd be a lot of people out there who'd be like, hey, Cruz is a pretty good chance. And I thought they'd be about 60-40. I did not think that they'd be 90-10, and especially with the majority coming by TKO. I like Medici in this fight. I really do think he has a high ceiling in the division. I think he's going to be, at the worst case scenario for Medici in his UFC career, he will be one of those entertaining guys you can throw on a prelim who, no matter who he's matched up against, he's going to go out there and have a fun fight. So I'm really excited for this one, but I agree. I've also got Medici.
Maybe Uros Medici is going to become the lightweight Dana Rodriguez. Who knows? I'm really looking forward to this fight. We both have Serbia's own Uros Medici to get the win. It should be a great one. We've got a great card. 3 title fights at the top. Nunes, Anderson. You got Jan taking on Sterling. And in the main event, holy smokes, Jan Blachowicz defending against the middleweight champ, Israel Adesanya. So it should be a great card, a great night of fights. Make sure you keep it locked in with Fighting Picks, Matt. As we always say, let's get into it. We're talking about not even one of, the most stacked women's division in the UFC. At strawweight, we have Livinha Souza taking on Amanda Lemos. And if we're talking about nicknames, for Amanda Lemos, is it Amandinha? Is it? And it's a Brazilian gangsta. I know that. For Souza. And Matt, in this fight, I wouldn't say a clash of styles, but if you look at Souza, she is, and I'm going to read out all of her titles. She's the former Invicta, Talon MMA Circuit, XF MMA, Coastal Combat, and Predator FC champion. And with Predator, she was a flyweight. With all the other ones, a strawweight champ. And that's where this one gets funky fresh, because you look at Amanda Lemos, she took a lot of time off between her UFC debut and her second to last fight. She debuted at bantamweight against Leslie Smith, and she lost that fight. It was a TKO loss in the second round. It was kind of a weak stoppage, but I'll give the referee props, and I'll give Leslie Smith props as well, because she just continued to strike up against the cage. It was a classic Leslie Smith fight where Smith just kept her head down, kept pressing forward, landing in combination. And for Lemos, she was looking to counter. She has a nice high tie stance, and that hasn't changed from bantamweight down to strawweight. And the other thing that hasn't really changed, I figured, you got a bantamweight coming down. Her gas tank's probably going to be a huge issue. Hasn't really shown to be an issue so far, and that was the thing I remember when we looked at Amanda Lemos' last fight. She had the Smith fight, long layoff, fought Miranda Granger, finished her in this first round, looked pretty good in that fight too. And for Granger, long-rangey striker for the division, but not really the greatest ground game. Hasn't had a great run in the UFC, if we're being completely honest with ourselves. But in the fight against Mizuki, it was really the Amanda Lemos show. And we can go round by round in that one, because if you look at Mizuki, on paper, best female fighter of all time. She has all of the credentials. Like, her jiu-jitsu's good, her wrestling's good, her striking's good, and she has all these belts and all these different disciplines. But when it comes to MMA, has a bit of a tough time. So for Amanda Lemos, Great combination. She can counter. And the one thing that I really find interesting about Amanda Lemos too, she fights well behind the two black lines. Most people don't. She does. On her back foot, she has a lot of success. She's not too heavy on her lead leg. She can kind of hang back a little bit, really throw hands. Amanda Lemos, very interesting fighter. Good wrestling in her own right. She's taking on Livinha Souza, and I talked about all of the different titles and everything she's done in the past. In the UFC, it's been a weird run for Souza because we've talked about, her last fight, Ashley Yoder. It was a really close fight. I mean, MMA decisions over there. You look at the total numbers, 29-27 for Souza. You had 14 29-28s for Souza. Sorry, this is the Frota fight. That was a split decision. And then 2 29-28s for Frota. Frota weighed in at 123. But the Yoder fight, if you look at that one, Matt, 7 29-28s for Souza and 10 29-28s for Yoder. It was a close one. Souza, Olympic in judo, and she was on the Olympic team there, former pro soccer player. She's got two good things, a wild overhand right and really, really good takedowns and submissions. So this should be a very interesting fight, and I think it's a well-matched fight.
I agree. And Livinha Souza, I gotta be honest, I thought she was gonna have a big splash when she came to the UFC, because there was about a 6-month period where I was watching a lot of Invicta shows, and it just so happens that she was the champ at the time. So when she finally came over, this is finally not the first time I've ever been able to do this, but I'm like, this is one that I've been watching for a long time. I don't want to say she's the Will Brooks of Invicta, but she is starting to fall into that category. Please let me explain. When she fought in Invicta, she looked like she had every aspect of MMA. She really did look like a phenomenal, well-rounded athlete. And you go through some of the wins. Deanna Bennett, I know we make fun of her sometimes. She's sort of quirky and whatnot, but that's just a great win to have on your record, especially on your way up. She is one of those names, and Alex Chambers is another one. You might look at her record, and it's not great, but those are the fighters you have to beat if you ever want to become somebody. You need to beat the Alex Chambers of the world. You need to beat the Deanna Bennett's of the world. The Angela Hill fight was fairly close, because fun fact, that was the first fight I had ever watched in Invicta. Great job, Angela Hill. You made me a fan. But it was a really close fight, and it showed that Souza, she actually has decent cardio, even though her style is very, I would say, athletics-oriented. She does try to force things every now and then. Her takedowns aren't as silky smooth as you might expect from someone who has been at the Olympic level. She will try to use her physical strength, and it's weird for Souza. She's a great example of a fighter who needs to mix it up, but sometimes she doesn't, and she will just get happy with her hands. And it's odd because on the ground, she looks great. Like, go back to the Frota fight. I know Frota weighed in. She was massive for the weight division. But Souza she did everything you would expect her to do. She had wrestler. She looked good on the ground. Her striking is a little bit one-dimensional, but it gets the job done. If I duck into an overhand right, where is my head? Pretty much in the exact same position to shoot a double leg. So just that can get you fairly far. But then you look at the Brianna Van Buren fight, and Van Buren in her own right is a very good prospect. When Souza can't out-wrestle you, she will run into a lot of trouble. It's because on the feet, I'm going to call this the Jack Hermanson effect forever, I think. She just seems a little bit uncomfortable. It doesn't matter how good her overall skill set is. It's just her striking is a little bit behind, and since it is so one-dimensional, if you can sort of find out, okay, she's throwing the overhand right, I can slip to the left. She's throwing the leg kick. If I check it, listen, it's still going to hurt me, but these are all weapons that I can deal with. Then you talk about the wrestling. She has very good wrestling, but I don't know if Souza has the wrestling to really force the fight to Amanda Lemos. And with Lemos, you said she can fight well backwards. It's going to be really important for her to do that in this fight, because we know about the pressure of Souza, and we know about the wrestling and the overhands. Souza's just going to be she will be moving forward a lot in this fight. I don't know why that was so hard to say. And I'm just curious, how is Lemos going to deal with the pressure? Is she going to shoot her own takedowns? Is she going to be happy keeping this on the feet? Kind of like we saw with Alex Caceres, Kevin Kroom. Lemos has the different tools to fight this fight. It really just depends on how she deals with the problems that Souza brings to her. Lemos could outstrike Souza throughout this fight. She could shoot her own takedown and do well on the mat. Amanda Lemos just has a lot of skills that I think Livinha Souza is going to have trouble with.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, you look at this fight, and for Souza, she really kind of closes distance with the overhand right. And again, she has a cracking leg kick, and that could really cause a lot of problems for Lemos too. I mean, she stands pretty high up. She does put some weight on her lead leg, but when she's backing up, when she's throwing the counters of her own, it's not something that I worry about a whole lot. But I look at Livinha Souza, and when she goes for takedowns, it's either a single leg or an upper body throw. There's not a ton of double legs in her arsenal. And when you look at Amanda Lemos, what does she do? Well, when she gets boxed up and when she gets her back up against the cage, and if she's able to dig underhooks, she goes for a trip and pushes forward, and that's how she gets a lot of her takedowns. Now, for both of these women, it's not something that you see a lot of out of fighters in this division. That's the thing. They're going to cause a lot of issues and problems for a lot of these women from 20 to 10, and maybe even more. But for Lemos, it's a thing of like almost the unknown. Again, you look at the 2 wins that she has in the past. You beat Miranda Granger, you beat Mizuki. Okay, now you're finally getting that tough test in Livinha Souza that's been a champ with all of these different organizations, Invicta included. And for Souza, definitely has the more, I would say, well-rounded record if you're looking at the names. I mean, again, you bring up Deanna Bennett. That was the second fight with Invicta. She loses to Hill. She beats Hamasaki, a pioneer and a GOAT in women's MMA. Morandin, Chambers, Frota. Even in that Frota fight, again, it was a split decision. I thought Souza won it, but there were moments where Frota was on top, and Souza, yes, she's going to fight and look for submissions, but Frota had some opportunities. Again, she weighed in 7 pounds overweight, so take it for what it's worth. But you look at this fight, and overall, it's just tricky to try and figure out, because again, that Ashley Yoder fight, it was a unanimous decision win, but Yoder gave her problems, and we saw Yoder... Well, she was supposed to fight last weekend against Angela Hill in the rematch, but it didn't happen. So we get this fight here, Matt. The most surprising thing to me out of everything, Amanda Lemos, the biggest mover and shaker by far on this card, 73% movement in her line. Lemos open a plus 165 underdog. She's now a minus 223 favorite. For Souza, open up a minus 215 favorite. She's now plus 178 underdog. You don't see that very often ever. And then if you have a look at the Tapology votes, a total split, 1,198 total votes, 68% on Souza, 86% by decision. Same thing for Lemos. A lot of people picking her to win by decision as well. So the voters are going with Souza. The money's coming in heavy on Lemos. When I did up my notes and I was watching all these fights, the one troubling thing I had for Lemos was that she can be a slow starter. And she's the type of person that kind of has that output as the fight goes on. Souza's the more credentialed as far as maybe the grappling's concerned, especially the judo's in her favor. But I like Lemos' hands. I really like her boxing, and she's not as one-dimensional. So I'm going to go with technique over power. I like Lemos in this fight.
I agree with you. I like Lemos, but I feel like there's a couple speaking points that we have to talk about for Souza. You had mentioned the trips of Lemos. Souza, with that judo background, goodness, words are difficult today. With her judo background, she can counter a lot of those trips of Lemos. And I'm not saying that she's going to go out there and Ronda Rousey her and throw her on her head in 2 seconds, but when you look at the way Lemos does like to get takedowns, it does play into the grappling style of Souza. I do agree with you, though. I like Lemos in this fight. I think she's the more well-rounded of the two. And at this point, I think we've all come to the agreement that you kind of have to pick the better fighter over the one who just has more power. So I like Amanda Lemos a lot.
If you want to watch one thing that's important in this fight as far as a fighter's base, we always kind of make fun of the fact, Devin Clark, look at him at 205. His legs are giant. Look at Amanda Lemos' base for these fights. Again, I know she came down from bantamweight. Her upper body's not huge, but her legs are giant. As far as takedown defense, very, very good so far in her UFC career as well. So things to watch out for. It should be a great fight. We're both going with Brazil's, well, Amanda Lemos. We could have picked either, but Amanda Lemos should get the win in this fight. And Matt, maybe there's another Amanda from Brazil that can get a win too. I mean, Amanda Nunes taking on Megan Anderson. You got Jan Sterling. You got Blachowicz taking on Israel Adesanya. It's a great night of fights. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt, as we always say. Let's get into it. We have a couple of big-time prospects coming in here at welterweight. Philadelphia's own Sean Brady taking on Melbourne, Victoria, Australia. Their own guy, the Celtic Kid, Jake Matthews. Matt, how long do you think, and I know you don't know, but how long do you think Jake Matthews has been in the UFC?
A hot minute. Here's the thing, and I know you're going to go off, so I'll just take this. He's been around much longer than I think he has been.
He debuted in the UFC, and at the time, he was the youngest fighter in the UFC at 19 years old. He's 26 now, 17-4 total record.
Wild.
And if you have a look at the guys that Jake Matthews fought, well, he's lost the good fighters, and he's beaten fighters, and that's a bit of a trouble. He comes in, takes on Deshaun Johnson back in 2014, again, when he was 19 years old. Got a third-round win. Beat Wagner Roca, second-round submission. And then he fights James Vick, and he loses. And it's all right. And then he fights an Areola, and he wins that fight. And then he fights Johnny Case, and he wins that fight. He loses to Kevin Lee, loses to Andrew Holbrook by split decision in a fight where he was a huge favorite. He was a minus 500. Beats Bojan Velichkovic, and then we're moving up. Again, we're talking now, we went from lightweight at the start, we're moving up to welterweight. We beat Velichkovic, we beat Li Jingliang, we beat Shinjo Anjai, a guy that Bellator fans called a can when MVP beat him. So just keep that in mind.
Because he is one.
Loses to Rocco Martin, fights the guy with the sweater known as Rostam Akman, beats Emil Mek, beats Diego Sanchez, now he's taking on Sean Brady. Weird thing is, lost a round in the Emil Mek fight, don't love that. And then he fought Diego Sanchez, who was totally into crystals by then because this was last year. But Diego Sanchez was doing like weird stuff with his hands. He threw that weird kick in the third round. It's just odd because for me, Jake Matthews is forever going to be like Eric Silva. He's just always going to be a prospect to me because he came in so young.
Is Diego Sanchez going to have the post-fight career very similar to Steven Seagal after he left acting? Because that seems to be where
Fighting
this
George St. Pierre?
Yeah, or just throwing a bunch of Russian guys around for no good reason. And that's really the only two directions I see Diego Sanchez's future taking. This is a really fun fight. And for Jake Matthews, you said prospect. I did give it a little bit of a face, but you did quickly correct yourself. He is slowly becoming the Eric Silva, because you mentioned it. I didn't know exactly how long he had been in the UFC for, but Jake Matthews has been around for a while. And I keep on thinking back, like, okay, when did I really get invested in MMA? Like, kind of get back into it? I'd say probably like 2015, 16. And that's when Jake Matthews, he was starting to be that prospect. He wasn't just a young fighter in the UFC. He was starting to get some wins off. And there were starting to be, I don't know if we say whispers of a Jake Matthews, maybe a future contender one day. But there was a lot of hype behind Jake Matthews. The issue is, he's way too heavily muscled, and it works to his detriment every single fight. Jake Matthews is starting to become a bit of an Andrew Sanchez, where he looks really good until he doesn't. And again, you bring up the Emil Mech fight. That's exactly what happened in that fight. How do you beat Emil Mech? All you have to do is take him down. And I say all you have to do is take him down.
Paul Harris couldn't do it.
Paul Harris can do it because he got knocked out in 5 seconds. But if you're able to wrestle Emil Mech for any period of time, you're probably going to get him down to the ground. But as that fight did progress, you can tell the fight does wear on Jake Matthews, whether he's the one who's just really well offensively or whether he's the one who is on the back foot. And it's odd too, because Jake Matthews in my mind is a grappler. When I think of Jake Matthews' best position, he's a great wrestler. He's very, I don't want to say Jimmy Crute, but they do have sort of that similarity where he's going to really try to impose his physicality on you. The weird thing is for Matthews, he doesn't fish for a lot of submissions. He is kind of happy to stay on top of his opponents. And go back to the Li Jingliang fight. Yeah. That's by far the best fighter he has ever fought. And he had him in a very tight submission. He almost guillotined him until he, got his eyes gouged out. But you look at how good Jake Matthews can be. The best version of Jake Matthews can beat Li Jingliang in a fight of the night contender fight. Like, that's a very good fighter right there. The worst version of him can get dropped in the third round and choked out by Anthony Rocco Martin. Like, there's just such a big discrepancy between the best version of Jake Matthews that I've ever seen and the worst version of Jake Matthews that I've ever seen, that it is really hard to see where Sean Brady does fit into all that. Because Sean Brady, what does he do? He's got great power in his hands. He's good on the ground. And it is true, because he's one of those weird fighters where you look at him, very striking style, he can submit you in a plethora of ways, and that's what makes this fight so fun.
Sean Brady reminds me of a new age Anthony Smith. There, I said it. You watch him fight, very tall, very long for the division, understands his body, and I know that sounds really strange, but he knows exactly what to do in these fights. You go back, you watch his UFC debut. He's coming in here, he's undefeated as a pro, undefeated as an amateur. Right now, he's on a 17-fight win streak. He was the CFFC champ. He had a win over Colton Smith, who you knew and loved from, well, his Tyrion Ware type of run in the UFC. Go back and look at Colton Smith's record. I know a lot of people don't like him from The Ultimate Fighter. But for Sean Brady, a good test against Court McGee. And he wins that one and passes the test with flying colors. So who do they give him? Another prospect in the Austrian Wonder Boy, Ismail Nardiev. And he beats him and he takes him down and he wears on him. Then he fights Christian Aguilera, who people were high on him because of the Anthony Ivy fight. But really, it was Sean Brady's fight. And he wins that one. And then the tricky thing about all of this is the fact that Sean Brady had his comeuppance and should have had his come out party back in December when he was going to take on Bilal Muhammad, who's now has a main event. And Brady forced out of that fight. And I don't love that. Like, it sucks. If you're a big Brady fan, you want to see him have the fights against Bilal Muhammad. If you fight Jake Matthews, kudos to you if you win. But if you beat Muhammad, you're in the top 15. If you beat Jake Matthews, you're another win, maybe 2 away from the top 15. So for Brady, it is an entirely winnable fight. The thing is, though, Brady's good at a lot of things. Brady's great at jiu-jitsu. Again, he's at a Renzo Gracie in Philly. There's a lot of good training partners there. We've talked about that gym time and time again. For Jake Matthews, very well-rounded, and I like it. You talk about his wrestling and his jiu-jitsu. Maybe he doesn't use jiu-jitsu a lot. He's very good once he gets into position. Doesn't really do a whole hell of a lot with it. He's a good striker. It's just there's nothing that stands out and makes me go, geez, Jake Matthews is like great at overhand rights, or he has a great check left hook, or he throws a nice low kick. He's just very good at everything. For Sean Brady, I think he just kind of has some of those skills just kind of cranked up a little bit. And that's the other thing, too. Sean Brady's 28 into this fight, understands the body weight, understands the throws, understands the striking. Jake Matthews should, too. He's 26 by now. It's kind of crazy.
I think both guys probably understand their bodies by 26 and 28 if they're both in the UFC, but I kind of see where you were going with that. Here's the best thing I can say about this fight. Do you want to know a great fighter you can compare Sean Brady to? Jake Matthews. You want to know a great fighter you can compare Jake Matthews to? Sean Brady. Yeah, they do slightly different things, but when you look at their game plans as a total, very, very similar. I will admit, Jake Matthews will be fishing for a lot more takedowns. He will be more wrestling offensive with his game, whereas Sean Brady, he can kind of concede the takedown. Now, I'm not saying he's going to want to do that in this fight because Jake Matthews, from the top, it's not like he's going to try to submit you or get you with a lot of ground and pound, but he can win rounds that way. And for Sean Brady, that's something you can't let go. You can't let Jake Matthews win round 1 and win round 2, and you'd be forced to try to stop him in the 3rd round, because that happens in a lot of Matthews fights. And it's not like Sean Brady doesn't have the power or doesn't have the submission skills, but the last place that you want to be in the cage is down 2 rounds to none, trying to get some comeback from behind victory. The great news is Jake Matthews leaves those windows. After that first round, that big push from Jake Matthews, he will start to fall off a cliff. And the great thing about Sean Brady, and you had brought it up, the Court McGee fight, Court McGee is another one of those great skill check kind of fighters where he's your UFC debut, you're going in there, what do you have to do to beat Court McGee? Got to defend a lot of takedowns, and you have to have good cardio. If you could pass those 2 tests, then you could beat Court McGee. Sean Brady proved that. He looked great in that fight, and I really think that if you kind of take that fight as a small sample size, if Sean Brady uses a similar game plan, he can beat Jake Matthews.
And the 2 other stats that I have that you're going to think, oh, okay, well, how does that apply here? Jake Matthews, 17-4 overall. He's 12-1 at welterweight. He's 0-1 in the U.S. This is his 2nd fight ever in the States. Kind of crazy to think about. For Sean Brady in the takedowns, his debut, he went 2-3. Then he went 4-9. Then he went 2-2. Very good offensively when he's going for his takedowns. As well. And efficient. And, I mean, again, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt in his back pocket. Not to say that Jake Matthews doesn't have Jiu-Jitsu. He's also a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt as well. So lots of different layers in this fight. This should be a very interesting one. And again, I think the winner of this fight, you're 1 or 2 away from the top 15. For Matthews, he beat Diego Sanchez pillar to post that whole fight. That's a good confidence booster for sure. I mean, Mickey Gall couldn't do it, so there's that. And if you want to focus on the Tapology votes, quick, Matt, 1,271 of them, 78% Brady. I'm kind of surprised to see this for the first time. 71% of those voters saying that he's going to win by decision. And if we have a look at the odds in this one, Sean Brady over a 2-1 favorite. He opened -170. The line dropped. A little bit of money coming in on Matthews over the past week. Brady now a -215 favorite. If we have a look at Jake Matthews, again, I said he was the underdog. Open a +145. He's now at a +174. So, Matt, in this one, I think it's a close fight. I think the odds kind of really accentuate it because, you know, for Brady to take on pretty well any other welterweight, if he was taking on a gritty veteran, he'd probably be an even bigger favorite.
Oh, yeah.
I still like Brady in this fight.
I like Sean Brady a lot. Here's the great news for him. Bilal Muhammad is just a far better Jake Matthews. Like, stylistically, they're not that much.
Is everybody in MMA a Jake Matthews?
No, well, just Bilal Muhammad, what's he great at? Well, yes, he's a better wrestler than Matthews, but I don't think his jiu-jitsu's at that level. And he does throw a lot of volume on the feet. Those are things that you have to watch out for when you are fighting Jake Matthews. I like Sean Brady a lot in this fight, and it does suck because he did have a big opportunity taken away from him because of his last fight. And now we see where Bilal Muhammad is, so who knows what a win would have done for Sean Brady if he was able to beat Muhammad. But this is a very winnable fight for Sean Brady. I think Brady's going to be around for a long time in this division too. I like Jake Matthews in some areas. If he can get an early takedown, if he can force the fight to Brady and really make Sean Brady become a defensive fighter, I think Matthews can have a little bit of success. My issue, though, is that success is going to fall off at a certain point. He cannot keep that pace up for all 15 minutes. And I think it's just a point in time until Sean Brady lands a big shot to get Jake Matthews down, looks for submission, or he's just able to wrestle Jake Matthews himself. So I think this is a phenomenal fight between two really well-rounded martial artists, but I do like Sean Brady.
Matt, Philadelphia, bringing that hotness. You get the Dawkins brothers going at it. Matt, we're liking Sean Brady in this fight. Really looking forward to it. 3 title fights up at the top. So you're going to want to keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt, as we always say. Let's get into it. Very interesting fight at light heavyweight. We have our second UFC debut out of 2. There's only 2 of them on this card. New Zealand's own Carlos Ulberg taking on Kenney and Nzechukwu. And Matt, for Nzechukwu, a guy that was on Contender Series a couple of different times, finally earned his contract, and in his UFC debut, took on, well, a ranked fighter. He took on Paul Craig. It didn't go all that well for him. Took some time off, recuperated, and he took on Darko Stosic. And Matt, if I know anything from doing this for almost 3 years now with Fight Night Picks, it's that people from Europe are very, very sensitive about Darko Stosic. And picking anybody to beat Stosic, you're going to be in a bad spot. Well, let me tell you this. Darko Stosic gave that fight away. In the second round, he kicked Kennedy in the nuts. In the third round, he kicked him in the nuts. And he probably, well, he would have won the fight if he didn't have 2-point deductions for nut kicks. And actually, the reason why the 2 points were deducted, well, he had one before in the fight. He just kept kicking him in the nuts. That's the problem. Kennedy Nzechukwu is one of the biggest light heavyweights you're ever going to see. I mean, you look at him, 6'5", 83 inches of reach. And he has one thing in common, and it's a cop-out. It really is. I could compare him to any other light heavyweight in the world. But I will compare him to John Jones because he's so tall and he's so long, and he holds his lead hand out there because he's a southpaw. He holds it out with his fingers out to try and control distance, but then he doesn't really do anything with it. And that's pretty much the MO in Kennedy Nzechukwu. The thing that I don't love about him, I mean, listen, he comes out of Fortis MMA, is that when he gets into spots, you hear Saif Saud yelling just different things to do, and Kennedy doesn't really do them. I mean, there's one point in the Stuzich fight, he yelled for an underhook and for him to kind of shove him, and it took a while, and he did it, and it was good. But you hear Saif yelling out of the corner, throw a leg kick, throw a counter, throw something, and he just doesn't do a whole lot. And the trouble was, you watch his first fight on Contender Series, well, it's a win, and then you watch his second fight, and he's taking on Dennis Bryant, and the commentary team says something absolutely absurd. They say, we have to see the killer instinct out of him because if we don't, it's going to be a problem. He throws a head kick at Dennis Bryant and then throws a punch down, and it's more of like a hammer shot, but he throws it and hits Bryant right on the back of the head. He had Bryant pretty much dead to rights. What does he do? Backs off and goes, no, it was my fault. I hit him to the back of the head. And the referee says, keep going. Don't do that. Just keep going. Just keep going, Cody. Oh my gosh. It's just frustrating. He's fighting Carlos Ulberg, who is A, male model, B, was supposed to be on The Bachelor down in the Anzac region called Game of Bros, wasn't on it. He's a pro kickboxer with an extensive kickboxing record, and he fought one of my bugaboos, one of my personal guys that you might watch Fight Night Picks and you know, like I'm a Jan guy. You know that I'm a Cyril Gane guy. I've been following Askar Askarov forever.
I'm a Jan guy, I'm a Gane guy. That's going to be a rap verse one day.
If you know anything about Craig Aalon, well, Matt, I had to write this down in my notes. I'll show you when I find it. Oh, it's right there. He fought the Honey Bear. He fought my guy Jake Hune, and it was with EM Legend Fights in China. They had a kickboxing match, and he finished him in the third round, knocked him down twice. It was amazing. You know, the Honey Bear from Ryzen. But it's great. Carlos Ulberg, truly, he's 5-0. That's the other thing. Every other site, SureDog, Tapology, all of the sites, I think even MMA Form Guide, all have him as 3-0. ESPN and UFC have him as 5-0 now. He had 2 fights in the regional scene in 2013 that a lot of them don't count, but he is 5-0. I know a lot of people are going to dispute his record down in the comment section, so let me kind of back myself up there. This guy's coming out of City Kickboxing, 7th fighter out of City Kickboxing in the UFC.
They're all right down there.
Knocked out Bruno Oliveira, who I thought of as a very good prospect. Even though he's older, very good prospect. And the trouble was, Bruno pre-fight talked about, well, I want to knock this guy out, and I'm going to outbox him. And he goes in there and doesn't throw any kicks, goes boxing, and gets knocked out. So for Carlos Ulberg, very good striking. Definitely has the killer instinct, and one of those guys that, again, whether he's 3-0 on the site you're on or he's truly is 5-0, it's a weird ceiling because he's already 30. The clock's ticking.
Oh, it definitely is, but I don't think this is going to be a Jacob Malkoon situation where a guy comes in and you're like, oh, well, he trains with good fighters, so I'm sure he's good himself. Carlos Ulberg, his pure kickboxing is absurd. And in MMA especially, he's going to give a lot of guys trouble on the feet. And this is one of those classic stylistic matchups. Let's be honest, the UFC loves city kickboxing. You know what's really good for the UFC? Is city kickboxing guys keep on winning. Carlos Ulberg it's not an underhand toss of an opponent because Nzechukwu is such a powerful guy, and if he does catch you, he can put you away, but you really set this fight up perfectly. There's a lack of volume. He does get a little bit wild on the feet, and against a guy who is as crisp as Ulberg.
No. He doesn't get wild at all.
Well, you have to throw, I guess. And for Nzechukwu, if you are just standing there with your hand out, you're going to be biting on feints. And this is what I'm going to talk about this a lot in the main event. City kickboxing, everyone does it. They throw a ton of feints at you. And what they really like to do is they wait to figure out how you're defending each and every one of your strikes. And then they will pick apart sort of the holes in your defense. Nzechukwu is going to bite on those feints, and Ulberg's going to have Adesanya there all week long to help him with his game plan. It's just one of those fights that, listen, Ulberg, you look, he doesn't have the experience edge. He doesn't have maybe the most well-rounded MMA game, but when you just feed him MMA strikers for the most part, he is going to be able to beat them. At light heavyweight, listen, if he goes out there and fights, let's say, to bring up Jimmy Crute again, let's say he fights Jimmy Crute. Jimmy Crute's going to single leg him, take him down, and probably head and arm choke him. But when you do give him those guys who are happy to stand on the outside with him, maybe a Khalil Roundtree, I guess that didn't work out for Gokhan Saki, but those guys who we are expecting to go out there and strike, you're going to expect Carlos Ulberg to win them.
And for Carlos Ulberg, even in my notes, I had good feints, good head movement, check left hook, left, right, knockout. That was how he was able to do it against Oliveira. For Kennedy, the problem that I have, for such a long guy, he doesn't throw a lot of leg kicks, and you'd think he'd kind of keep his head back, toss in some leg kicks, and really chop down some of these guys, because he's always going to have a reach advantage. But by percentage, in terms of leg kicks, 4% of his strikes against Stuzich, leg kicks, 0% against Paul Craig, 5% against Bryant, and then in his fight against Berzin in his Dana White's Contender Series debut, which was a split decision win, he threw none. I don't necessarily love that. Again, the key to the fight against Stuzich was the repeated kicks to the nuts, and Kennedy said it himself after the fight when he was interviewed. You know, he didn't think it was a good performance. He didn't really think he was deserving the win. The weird thing is, he's been out for a long time. He's been out for about a year and a half, so maybe, I cross my fingers, Kennedy's added some wrinkles to his game, because this is a guy that I'd like to see make moves at light heavyweight. You can see physically, from the height, from the reach, from the stance, he has the tools. It's just bringing him into practice, and I don't love it when the commentary team goes, well, you know, behind closed doors, we were talking about it. He's got to start striking. He's got to start landing. And you can't say that you're sorry for hitting a guy to the back of the head in a fight. Don't do that, Kennedy. So for me, I like Kennedy and Nzechukwu as a fighter. I want to see him succeed. I think it's Ulberg's fight to lose, because if this is a pure kickboxing fight, Ulberg should win it 9 times out of 10. I haven't seen much of a ground game out of Nzechukwu. So for me, it's Ulberg. I look at the Tapology votes. 74% of 1,236 total votes are for Ulberg. There's a large percentage, 76%, that are saying that he's going to win by knockout. For Paul Craig, he submitted Kennedy in that fight. And then if you have a look at the odds, Matt, Ulberg open to minus 172. He's now minus 242. For Nzechukwu, open plus 144. He's now at a plus 194. So the money's on Ulberg. The votes are on Ulberg. You like Ulberg here?
I do, and here's the thing. I'm probably going to pick Ulberg until he does fight a wrestler, because that's the thing. On the feet, with his feints, with the dynamic just striking of Carlos Ulberg, he's going to give these guys a lot of trouble. And the fact that, and you had mentioned it, right, left. People don't do same-side strikes all that much in MMA. It is a lot of left, right. That's how your momentum works. But when you do deal with these upper echelon kickboxers, really just strikers as a whole, they can go jab, right hook, into a left hook. Like, they can mix up their combinations and have combos that are very unorthodox for just a regular MMA striker to see. So I like Ulberg a lot in this fight, although I will admit, it is hard to predict those pure kickboxers who are making their MMA transition.
The other thing about Kennedy, before we let you go, he has really good takedown defense. I mean, if we've talked about all of his fights, 4 of 10 were successful against him, 1 of 16, 0-0, 2 of 7, 78% takedown defense. If he can parlay that into a little bit of offense, you never know. Maybe. All the things are there, all the parts. It's like building a house out of Lego bricks. We just got to put them in the right places. And Kennedy's going places, but overall, I like Ulberg in this fight. Again, he beat my guy, Jay Kuhn. That means nothing, but you can find it on YouTube. It's a fun fight to go back and watch. But yeah, I've got City Kickboxing's Ulberg in this one. Matt's got Ulberg. Will Adesanya be able to do it? Will Kai Kara France be able to do it? We'll see what happens later on this card. It's a great one. 3 title fights at the top, of course, in your main event. Jan Blachowicz taking on Israel Adesanya. So Matt, as we always say, Fight Night Picks. Let's get into it. We have a former title challenger, and I'm not lying. We have Tim Elliott taking on Jordan Espinosa in a flyweight showcase here. Matt, flyweight never die. A couple of guys that have kind of been there and done that. And for Jordan Espinosa, it's kind of long in the tooth now. He's been with the UFC, it seems, for a little while. He came in on Contender Series back a time ago. And while his record in the UFC isn't in the positive, well, neither's Tim Elliott's. He's 5-9 in the UFC, but he's taken on some of the best competition that's been thrown at him. For Jordan Espinosa so far, if you look at the wins, we're talking Eric Shelton in his debut. We're talking Mark De La Rosa. The losses to Max Schnell, Alex Perez, and David Dvorak in his last fight. And the reason why David Dvorak won that fight, not because I love him, it's because of the leg kicks. It was the leg kicks. The leg kicks really troubled Jordan Espinosa. And if I could show you, Espinosa is the type of guy that had a really long wrestling career. He's known for his wrestling, but he hasn't really shot for a lot of takedowns in the UFC. He doesn't really have the highest percentage of takedowns attempted and actually made successful. His takedown defense is great. But Jordan Espinosa kind of fancies himself a guy with a very long stance, and it's forward and back. It's kind of almost like a karate stance. And he throws a powerful right hand, but really it hasn't landed all that well. He's taking on a guy, and I know for Tim Elliott, his handle on the internet's at Awkward MMA. But if I could throw this to a guy that he used to play baseball with every summer growing up, He's a sketch bag. He's a straight up sketch bag. I mean, you watch Tim Elliott fight, and it's like if Dominick Cruz decided that he was going to take the Keith Peterson diet before a fight and just smoke and booze a bunch. That's how Tim Elliott fights. He's kind of wonky.
But wait, isn't it fun to watch, though?
Oh, no.
Okay,
Well,
we're taking
okay.
different tangents.
For Tim Elliott, if you want to see a fun fight, it's the time that he fought Askarov and did the drunk man, woo! And then he ended up on his back. But really, Tim Elliott does a lot of weird things. His grappling's all right. His jiu-jitsu's all right. His wrestling's pretty good. His striking's super unorthodox. And he throws a lot of kicks straight up the middle to keep you away from him. So he can kind of do... Well, again, Dominick Cruz does a figure 8. Tim Elliott does, I don't know, like a 69. Like, he just does the weirdest stuff. So for me, Tim Elliott's a tough nut to crack. Can Jordan Espinosa do it? Possibly. That's what makes this fight so fun. Because Jordan Espinosa, a lot more technical. Like, he's a lot more of a cerebral fighter.
Craig, you're more technical than Tim Elliott. That's the great thing about Tim Elliott, though.
Tim Elliott's, like, if he took Kevin Croom's game plan and you mix that with, like, a cat, that's kind of Tim Elliott.
Okay, there's a lot to absorb there. So I'm going to go through the jokes first. The first one was good. The 69 one, not great. You've done better. That's all I'll say. Tim Elliott is a fun fighter to watch. And yes, he does have that weird Jar Jar Binks drunken style, but it's a fun style to watch. He is going to go out there. And the great thing about Tim Elliott is I love it when Tim Elliott fights a prospect. He's the perfect guy to match up with a prospect because you can't just hit him with one shot and he's going to fall down. He's a very durable fighter. You can submit him on the map, and he's so good at scrambling that you're not just going to go and grab that submission. I understand. Go back to the Ben Nguyen fight. He was able to get submitted very early in that fight, same thing with Deiveson Figueiredo. But the people who can really submit Tim Elliott are the guys who can counter his wrestling with their own jiu-jitsu. Deiveson Figueiredo could submit anyone in the UFC with a guillotine. He has one of the best guillotines, arguably ever.
Let's talk about the losses. Demetrius Johnson, Figueiredo, Askarov, Royval, and Joseph Benavidez are just some of the losses.
They're all amazing. Like, those are some of the best fighters ever. And go back to the Demetrius fight. Tim Elliott was doing great. It was weird. And he had no business doing great in that fight. But look at that first round. And I'm not a big Ultimate Fighter fan, but I do remember I got excited. That was one of those like weird midweek cards. And I was like, okay, Tim Elliott fight DJ. Let's see what he does. And I was super impressed with Tim Elliott. It was a weird performance because you could tell Demetrius, is he better than Tim Elliott at everything? Well, of course he is. But the unorthodox style of Tim Elliott was giving DJ problems. And I always say it's the LeBron 2011 effect, but when you are so good and you're used to seeing everything a certain way in every single fight, when people throw you just a wonky look, sometimes, no matter how good you are as an athlete, it's going to take you a little while to adjust. And we saw that for Demetrius Johnson. With Jordan Espinosa, though, the film's been out there on Tim Elliott. This is the thing. The Demetrius Johnson fight was a long time ago, and I understand that was his introduction back into the UFC after his first run, if you will. But Jordan Espinosa has been able to watch a lot of film on Tim Elliott by this time, and I do think that, not that the game plan's out there, but you know what you're going to get from Tim Elliott. There is a certain unorthodoxness to his style, but at this point, he just does the same thing every fight. Yeah, it's weird, but the weirdness has been the same it's always been, and I do think fighters are starting to get a sense of his timing, where he's waiting a lot for his opponents to make a move, and then he tries to shoot a takedown. That's Tim Elliott's game. The issue is, I don't think he's fast enough on the feet anymore at 34 years of age to really be able to evade a lot of the strikes. And the Askarov fight is a perfect example, because if you think, okay, how's Askarov going to beat Tim Elliott? Well, both guys are great at scrambling, but you would think that if they get into a scramble, Askarov's going to end up on top, and he'll go to work from there. Askarov outstruck Tim Elliott and out-wrestled him, and a lot of that was because Askarov could fake his own takedown and land a straight shot down the middle. And Tim Elliott, you can tell, he would have been happy if Askarov shot the takedown because then he could initiate some of the scrambles. But when he did start with the striking, it would just kind of catch Tim Elliott off guard. He can get cracked clean. It's not that Espinosa is going to throw a lot of different strikes at him, but you mentioned it. The strikes that he does throw are quite hard, and we've seen Tim Elliott get cracked. And I don't want to say Tim Elliott has a bad chin, but I do think he's one of these fighters where at the age of 34, you're fighting at flyweight. Things aren't trending in the right direction for Tim Elliott, and I do think Jordan Espinosa is the type of opponent who can take advantage of Tim Elliott at this stage in his career.
Tim Elliott's last time out, he fought Ryan Benoit. And what's the story on Ryan Benoit? He's a good striker, and he's gone through a ton of injuries. And in that fight, Elliott won it. So if you look at the bookend and the last 5 on in, which is a new term with Fight Night Picks, you're going to see it on that last graphic. So the 5 on in for Tim Elliott, well, he's 2-3. And you look at the win, so he beat Mark De La Rosa and submitted him. That's a decent win. Then he loses to Figueiredo, then he loses to Askarov, then he loses to Royval. Okay, that's pretty tough. And then he fights Ryan Benoit. If you go back and watch that fight, Ryan Benoit probably won. MMA decisions, 12 voters had it for Benoit to 6 that had it for Elliott. Elliott ends up walking out of there as a winner. Like I said, for Espinosa, great wrestler. He was a high school state champ in New Mexico. He had the opportunity to wrestle in college. Again, the leg kicks are a problem. He throws a lot of them himself, but if you watch the Dvorak fight, every time you land right there, you're going to land on that leg and it gets kicked. And by the end of it, yeah, Espinosa, you could hear him in his corner. Like, I'm having a hard time walking here. I don't even, like, he didn't even know what to do. And he couldn't switch stances. It wasn't working for him. He can almost exclusively work out of orthodox and southpaw. No way, Jose. So if Tim Elliott can work a heavy leg kick game, maybe it works out for him in the end. Let's have a look quick at the Tapology votes, Matt. Holy smokes. There's 1,300 of them on the nose right now. 81% have Elliott, 60% by decision, 33% by submission. If we look at the odds, Tim Elliott open a -130 favorite. He's now at a +103. And if you look at Espinosa open +110, he's now at a -127. So the money came in on Espinosa. The fans have Tim Elliott. Always interesting to see the difference in them. It's a tricky one. Again, if you look at Espinosa, good footwork, wide stance, right overhand, and a double leg takedown, and that's the Espinosa game plan. Tim Elliott, you could juggle what he's going to do. Who knows?
No, I couldn't agree more. Here's the thing. Tim Elliott's really hard to pick for or against at this point in his career just because he is so unique and he is so awkward, not to bring his own nickname up, but you don't really know what you're going to get in between every single fight. I like Jordan Espinosa in this fight because here's the thing. He might not check leg kicks. He does throw them, though. Tim Elliott doesn't even throw that many leg kicks, but he is susceptible to them. And we do see this with some fighters. We do talk a lot about how fighters eat calf kicks now. There's a lot of fighters who offensively can throw it really well, but they don't know how to defend it. Dustin Poirier is another guy. Like, you see him. He doesn't check leg kicks all that well, but he's super good at throwing them. Tim Elliott doesn't even throw them. He's just bad at checking them, and he is more boxing heavy. And the thing with Tim Elliott, I don't even think Tim Elliott can hurt Jordan Espinosa on the feet. It's just the style that Tim Elliott has in the striking. He's the most male comparison to Roxanne Modafferi. And I know that's a weird comparison to make, but just hear me out. Tim Elliott, all he does is throw volume until he can get you down, and then his ground game, it is so unique. That's where he has his success. Roxanne does the exact same thing. So I think Espinosa, if he can cut through a lot of the BS, for lack of a better term, that Tim Elliott throws at him, if he does just stay dedicated to his output, if he can make this an ugly fight without really getting involved in a lot of those scrambles, because here's the thing, if you scramble with Tim Elliott, you're either going to submit him or he's going to end up on top and make your life a nightmare. It's really one or the other. I like Espinosa because I just feel like at this stage in his career, he's the safer pick, but I got to be honest, you can pick either one of these guys. I'm going to grab a thing of popcorn and a pop and just enjoy this one.
Well, that's exactly what I was going to say. It's a pop and popcorn fight for me, 100%. I mean, you look at Jordan Espinosa's first win in the UFC. See you later, Eric Shelton. Well, what's Eric Shelton? A really good wrestler for this division, and Jordan Espinosa was able to get the win there. Tim Elliott, defensively, maybe not the best wrestler. Offensively, very good because he's always working for takedowns. But that's the thing. You don't have to be a good defensive wrestler if you're a really good submission artist, and he goes for tons of submissions. Espinosa doesn't. So if Espinosa's going for position, it's going to be tough with Tim Elliott. And listen, if you look at the numbers so far, you have a bigger sample size for Elliott than you do for Espinosa. More volume, though, for Espinosa. Better percentages for Espinosa. I think Tim Elliott's a weird matchup for him, and that's the thing. I think if Elliott's able to just kind of circle away and throw a lot of volume, he's going to cause Jordan Espinosa a lot of problems. So, again, don't have a ton of confidence in it. I like Tim Elliott in this fight for the weirdness factor.
Yeah.
I like him as odd as he is, and maybe he does invest and see, hey, well, David Dvorak did that, and that's the thing. With the Glory MMA, you either get the cream of the crop or you get whatever's left at the end of the cream. You get the gross cream. And that's the thing. I mean, we saw Kevin Kroom come out last week. He talked game planning. The guy went in there and just
had a bad one.
I mean, he went fishing in a puddle. You knew he wasn't going to get anything, but he just kept casting away. So for me, I'm going to go with Tim Elliott. He's predictably unpredictable. You're going with Jordan Espinosa. It's an interesting fight, to say the least. Flyweight never die. 3 title fights at the top, Matt. We're really looking forward to this card. Let's keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, as we always say. Let's get into it. We got another big-time fight at flyweight. And listen, flyweight never die. I'm really excited for this one. We get Don't Blink, I'll wink, Kai Kara-France taking on Brazil's Rogerio Bontorin. And for Bontorin, you look at the guy's record, super, super impressive. I mean, 16-2 so far. He did lose his last fight, but when you're talking level of competition and you're losing fights to Ray Borg, where he just totally got outclassed by Ray Borg in that fight and taken down the whole time, listen, it is what it is. If you know Rogerio Bontorin, He has decent boxing combinations, but mainly he's known for his jiu-jitsu. The guy is an absolute killer on the mat. He's a national champion and state champion in jiu-jitsu, and you can see that from his fights. And if you want to go back, I mean, his UFC debut against Magomed Bibulatov, the takedowns from Bibulatov were absolutely insane. I mean, there was one where Bontorin threw a kick and Bibulatov like flipped him around. It was amazing. Magomed, he loses 2 fights. See you later. You're gone. I wish he was still around, but Bontorin wins that one by split. He beats Raulian Paiva in a fight where, listen, Bontorin was starting to swell up around his eye. Paiva had that disgusting cut where his eyebrow kind of just evaded him, and that was the end of the fight. The doctor ended it. Bisping was upset, but they showed it. It was gross. So Bontorin takes this fight. The weird thing about Bontorin is the fact that, listen, the Kai Kara France fight is great. He was supposed to fight Manel Kape back in, August? And the fight fell out because Bontorin hurt his ankle. And that's the other thing. He's out due to an ankle injury. He's been away for about a year since losing to Ray Borg terribly. Like, Borg just totally outclassed him. For Kai Kara France, since he's come into the UFC, very high-level competition, 5 on in. Paiva, split decision win. Mark De La Rosa loses to Moreno, beats Tyson Am, loses to Brandon Royval. And it was a fight of the night, and it ended in the second round. How crazy is that?
Absolutely wild. Like, Kai Kara France, if you just want an exciting fight, tune in to see him fight, because it doesn't matter who he's going to go out there against. He is a good example of level of competition does really matter for him, because I do think he can beat the guys in the top 5 on his best day, but I truly do believe, like, Rogerio Bontorin could go out there and completely outclass Kai Kara France, and I honestly wouldn't be that surprised, because, again, you talk to the level of competition, he's beaten guys who he should beat in the UFC, and then you look at his losses. Okay, you lost to Brandon Moreno in a phenomenal fight that, let's be honest, it was a really, really close fight that a lot of people did think Kara France won. And the Bontorin fight, not the Bontorin fight, in his last outing, he looked good, but against Royval, sorry, I forgot his name, he drops Royval, first strike he throws. Royval drops him, first strike he throws. An absolute back and forth brawl. But again, he's lost to Brandon Royval and Brandon Moreno in the UFC, 2 of the top-ranked fighters. And then you look at his other UFC wins. Tyson Nam, a very good fighter, but somewhat one-dimensional in his approach. Mark De La Rosa, who, again, a good fighter, but I would argue he just kind of goes out there and wrestles. He's not the most well-rounded guy. And that's my point with Kai Kara France. When he does fight the well-rounded guys who can really mix it up, he struggles. And it's weird because he comes from city kickboxing. You would expect a very kick-heavy attack. I would say he's one of the more boxing-heavy fighters from that gym. He goes out there, really likes to go to the body. We were talking about that earlier. And he's not at the Piotr Jan level of, I'm going to get my opponent hurt, then dig to the body to really try to wear them down. But it is something he likes to do in combination if he's able to get his opponent up against the cage. And he was doing a decent job with that against Brandon Moreno. But the thing with Moreno is he never gets tired. If fights were 10 rounds, Brandon Moreno would be undefeated. And against Kai Kara France, you could tell the output was starting to get to Kara France. The strikes were starting to land. And the weird thing for Kara France, defensively, he's not that great. And you look at everyone else in city kickboxing, okay, other than Dan Hooker, for the most part, they do a really good job at getting out of the way of strikes, whereas Kai Kara France, he's so aggressive that sometimes he does walk into his opponent's strikes, and it's just going to accentuate that power. Now, against Bontorin, it might not affect him just because the striking isn't there, but I do think when he does fight the Royvals again, when he does fight the Morenos again, some of those top-level guys in the division, I do think it's going to be a problem, because here's a great example. You're a big Askarov guy. Askarov is the fighter who is made to beat Kai Kara France. Like, he can mix up his wrestling with his striking and really do everything. And that's what worries me for Kara France moving forward. Although, I'll admit, I do like the foundation of his game.
I'll give you a second to kind of just slow yourself down. Slow your brain down.
I need to.
Kai Kara France, very good defensive wrestling. We've seen 90% takedown defense in the UFC. We've seen the fact that, and this is a stat that you're going to see pop up, it's the third one that pops up out of all of them, is the fact that his strike differential, it's pretty good. It's 0.16 or 1.16 strikes landed per minute, 2 strikes absorbed per minute. But it's 5.16 minus 4. Like, you're still taking a lot, and he even has 66% defense, but man, that's tricky. And the level of competition is something we talked about. Losses to Tatsumitsu Wada, very good fighter over with Ryzen. A loss to Pantoja on the Ultimate Fighter. A loss to Mark Striegel that we saw in the UFC. Like, the losses, even Dana Batgarel that we have in the UFC now. Like, there's losses to good fighters, and I know there's 9 of them on his record, but there's also 21 wins, so take it for what it's worth. For Bontorin, though, very good boxing, very, very good jiu-jitsu, and he can work the takedowns himself. And I know in the UFC for Bontorin, too, you look at it, I mean, he has the win over Gabriel over on Contender Series, then he beats Magomed Bibulatov, then he has a fight against Paiva, where, again, it's kind of tricky, but He has the takedowns. His defensive wrestling doesn't have to be that great because he's so good at jiu-jitsu. And his striking's not terrible. It is at a negative and his defense isn't great. But, yeah, well, that's probably the reason why I'm taking Kai Kara-France. It's the fact that his striking defense isn't that great. And again, Bontorin, very good at jiu-jitsu, but if you don't have striking defense against a primary kickboxer who has good defense or good wrestling defense, it's tough to go out there and win. We saw him eke out a split decision over Bibilatov. I just don't see it in this fight.
No, I agree. He does lack the transition, which is the wrestling. And if Bontorin was a better wrestler, if he did have, let's say, like a collegiate background, he'd be a nightmare to deal with in the UFC because you do look at his ground game and just how dangerous he is. And we talked about Jake Matthews earlier, another grappling heavy fighter, but he doesn't go for a lot of submissions. Bontorin does not have that issue. If he does get you to the mat, he is going to fish and go for submissions, but he's not going to jump on anything to really give you the opportunity to get back up to your feet. And that's what you like about him. He's not, and I always bring up Gilbert Burns from the first round of Tyron Woodley. He hasn't fully mounted. He probably could sit the last minute of the round just in full mount and get a little bit of offense off. Instead, he jumps for a triangle to try to finish it immediately. If you do go for those big actions, sometimes it gives your opponent enough space to get back up to their feet. But Bontorin, I don't think will have that issue in this fight. I am curious, and I'd love to get your take on this. Do you think he pulls guard at any point?
I think he will, and the other thing that kind of plays a bit of an X factor in here, and either look into it as much as you want or don't, and it'll probably be a conversation for after the fight more so than before. How's that ankle injury going to affect him in this one? I mean, you had a fight against Manel Kopp, and listen, people are down on Kopp, and I get it. Manel Kopp fought like Jairzinho Rosenstrike and lost to Gone, where we're just not doing anything. I mean, Manel Kopp, you expected the output. You expected the boxing. You just didn't do anything against Pantoja. People are down on him.
Pretty hard UFC debut, though, to be completely fair.
And Kopp's a very good fighter if you watch him over with Ryzen. So you know how good he is. For Bontorin, you had a fight like that against what? An upper echelon guy. Kai Kara-France is too, but that's it. I mean, how good's Bontorin and how does he adjust in a fight like this? I just don't know. I look at the votes on Tapology. Kind of go through these for us, Matt.
So we've got at 1,283 votes on Tapology. Bontorin is at 26% of the votes, with Kai Kara-France at 74%. And honestly, that is a little bit interesting because Kai Kara-France, he's not Thomas Almeida, but his record is a little Thomas Almeida-y.
Big name, too. That's a thing.
Exactly. He's a big name. He has good wins in the UFC, but he doesn't have a great win yet. And beating Bontorin, it's not like that is a great win, but at least that will get you back into fighting a top 12, top 15 guy next. So I think Kai Kara-France, these are kind of surprising, but he is the bigger name out of the two, and normally that's how Tapology
This is where the odds get interesting. Bontorin, one of the bigger movers and shakers, open a plus 175. He's at a plus 114 now for Kara-France. He opened a minus 205. He's now minus 140. Money's coming in on Bontorin. The fans have Kara-France. Again, I set it up this way. I like Kara-France's defensive wrestling, and I like his striking output. If he can keep it on the feet, he should be able to get a win. If it gets down to the mat, again, you look at his record and it's salty, and he has a submission loss to Mark Striegel, who, listen, had a very good run on the regional scene. He hasn't lost by submission, since his last fight. But again, we were talking knockdown, this and that. Before that last fight, we're going way back to, Mark Striegel back in 2014. So he went 6 years without being finished. He got finished by Brandon Royval. Pretty good fighter. So if Bontorin gets a win here and if he submits Kai Kara-France,
oh my goodness,
that's not an easy thing to do. Again, last fight and then 6 years before that, it's a pretty hard thing to do. I expect Kara-France to get the win here, but Bontorin is a live dog in this fight.
I agree. You have to look here. Kara-France's last two losses just fought in a number one contenders fight to get a title shot. That tells you kind of where he is in this division.
And two judges said that he won a round in the Moreno fight.
Exactly. And honestly, just the sentiment online, a lot of people thought he did win that Moreno fight. It was a fairly close fight. Now, again, Moreno did pull ahead, of course, as the fight progressed because his cardio is absolutely insane. But that's the thing. I do think some people might be down on Kara-France's cardio because we've seen him get tired against Moreno, but no one in the UFC can really have an output like Moreno. Yes, Max Holloway can, but he is very unique in the fact that he does that to his opponent. He likes to make them tired and then really overwhelm them with volume. I like Kara-France in this fight. I think he has the higher ceiling in the division as well, but this is another pop and popcorn fight. Like, I do see this as, Bontorin gets one takedown, he can finish this fight, and if Kara-France can keep it on the feet, he can finish it as well.
Pop and popcorn with the boys, Matt. Really looking forward to this one. We both have Don't Blink, Kai Kara-France to get the win. Really looking forward to the card. I mean, of course, you have a teammate in Israel Adesanya taking on Jan Blachowicz in the main event. Nunes Anderson in a title fight between Petr Yan and Aljamain Sterling. So keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt. As we always say, let's get into it. Another big time fight at flyweight. We have Well, my flyweight Cyril Gahn from back in the day. Listen, if you're new with Fight Night Picks, we always appreciate you and the new viewer. You toss us a like, you toss us a sub.
I'll hit you with a Mario Yamasaki.
And you tune in every single week for question mark kicks. And if it's a pay-per-view, like it is this weekend, you tune in for the Fight Companion. But if you're an OG, and there's not many of you out there, and I know from the numbers, Fight Night Picks started in 2018 with a podcast. My goal was, I'd talk into this microphone right here and into the computer about everything and anything that had to do with MMA. We talk about like Ramsey Knee Gym. We talk about, I don't know, fighters with one championship that nobody had ever heard of at all. Like, let alone the famous ones. We talked about Askar Askarov a lot. And I say we, but it was me. And I was so high on Askar Askarov coming into the UFC. This guy made his debut against Brandon Moreno. And I was just hauling ass with the Askar Askarov train. We were going to the moon.
Disgusting.
And that draw, it was a close fight. Listen, I do think that Brandon Moreno won it, but the fight since against Tim Elliott and then the fight against Pantoja, Askar Askarov's continued to add wrinkles to his game. And listen, you know him for the combat sambo background, the MMA background. You know him for the wrestling, the jiu-jitsu, the whole real mixed bag. But the fact that coming into the UFC, the majority of his wins were by submission. He had a twister win. He had fought a high-level competition outside of the UFC in the lower weight classes, which is very tough to do. Like, I think of David Dvorak as maybe the only other fighter that had fought really good competition because it's tough, especially overseas, to find very good flyweights. And Askarov did just that, and he beat them in impressive fashion. So to come into the UFC with all of those finishes, to have the draw against Moreno, who has had great fights against Figueiredo, to have good fights against Tim Elliott where he had him rocked at the start and really just kind of continued to add wrinkles to his game. And then his last time out, he took on Pantoja, and you think, well, Pantoja's going to try and strike with him. Pantoja tried to grapple. And in the first round, Pantoja lunges in for a takedown. Well, Askarov just reverses and gets on top at the end.
There was that one back take, though, that was insane by Pantoja.
And there was, but Askarov fought a very good fight. Now, that fight against Pantoja was very close. This is the thing. Odds makers, the fans, everybody have Askarov to win this fight. And again, I'm one of the most pro Askar Askarov guys. It's me and it's Marcel Dorf blowing that horn at this point. Me and Dorf. Joseph Benavidez, though, I know he's lost his 2 fights in impressive fashion, but they're to the best flyweight in the world. So for Benavidez, listen, it's hard not to overlook him here.
It is. Oh, it really is. And Benavidez is in this really weird point in his career. And I always go back to a quote that Megan O'Leary had said before he had fought Figueiredo in their first fight. Because she gets asked a lot, okay, when do you think he's going to retire? He is 36, it's flyweight. Like, the end is somewhat near. And Megan O'Leary says, from Joseph Benavidez, that he's going to fight until he can no longer stand with that upper echelon of competition. So losing to Figueiredo, it doesn't say, like, okay, you're no longer a top-tier fighter. But losing in the way that he did against Figueiredo will take a lot of shine off of your name and make a lot of people not believe in you, especially going into your next fight. So I do agree 100%. I understand the odds makers are with Askar Askarov, and a lot of people are overlooking Joseph Benavidez, but this fight's going to go one of 2 ways. This fight's either going to be Uriah Faber versus Petr Yan, or it's going to be Uriah Faber versus Ricky Simone. And I really don't see it being any different than one of those 2 situations. It's going to be too much, too soon, too fast for Askar Askarov. You fought good guys in the past, but I would say Joseph Benavidez, at this stage of his career, is he as good as Brandon Moreno? No. Is he as good as even a Pantoja? Maybe not. But he's got all the veteran savvy in the world, and he's a fighter who, no matter what, he's always going to be able to think of, okay, I can get out of this position. I can get out of this position. Another thing about Joseph Benavidez, I'd say some of the best submission defense of all time. And I understand he got submitted in his last fight. Joseph Benavidez is the best at getting out of the deepest submissions you've ever seen in your life. Go back to the first, 3 rear naked chokes that he escaped against Figueiredo. They were fully in. His body was extended. He looked like he was about to pass out, but he always found a way. And that's the thing with Benavidez. I love the wrestling game of Askarov, but when you talk about scrambles and Tim Elliott, Joseph Benavidez is like if Tim Elliott was really, really smart. He's not just going to scramble he's not going to scramble for the sake of scrambling. He's going to scramble for the sake of position. And that's the important thing with Benavidez. He doesn't have the most powerful hands. He doesn't have the best wrestling. But when we talk about guys who are just great at putting it all together, that's Joseph Benavidez. And I'm really excited for this fight with Askarov because we've seen Askarov against what I'd call a primary striker in Pantoja. Although, yes, he did decide to grapple in that fight. We've seen him with the, primary grappler, if you will, against a Tim Elliott. The one time we did see him fight the guy who can mix it up, it was a very close fight and it was a draw. I'm not saying Benavidez is at the Brandon Moreno level anymore, but if you're looking for a fighter who can somewhat replicate what Moreno was able to do in that fight, Joseph Benavidez might be that guy.
And if you look at Askar Askarov, he's another one of those fighters, we've talked about it earlier on this card, the fact that Askarov's one of those exponential output type of fighters. And no, it's not like 2 to 4 to 16. Like, it's not like that. But he will up his output as a fight goes on. He does get busier. He's almost completely deaf. It's kind of crazy to think about that, too. Not a lot of deaf fighters. I mean, Matt Hamill carved out a good career, but Askarov really paving a way there. And it's something that, you know, you don't have to put a lot of shine on it, but it is kind of important and kind of interesting as well. Very good on the back foot is Askarov too, and in a lot of his fights, I mean, he's trained with so many good fighters that it really just kind of bleeds over. So you look, he's kind of out of the PI right now. He spent some time in Vegas lately. Timur Valiev, Islam Makhachev. You talk about guys like that. Mavlid Haibulaev over at the PFL. A lot of very good fighters. Another one, Magomed Magomedov. And listen, you might go, oh, okay, Magomed Magomedov, big deal. Like, he just signed with Bellator or whatever. Just had an amazing fight with Bellator, and a guy that's fought Petr Yan in the past. So interesting stuff there. I think Askarov has a perfect camp to get ready for a fight like this. But so does Benavidez. And for Benavidez, the things that I would expect him to do here, a lot of in and out, a lot of movement, stuff to frustrate Askarov. Because Askarov, at the end of it, very good grappler, very good wrestler. He's a good boxer, and he switches stances a lot. He has a lot of power, but he doesn't have a ton of volume.
He doesn't have speed either. That's the thing with Askarov. I agree. His boxing's great. His power's great. But he has the Pedro Munoz issue where you look at his striking and it's phenomenal. Like, every technique's really good. He looks like he's moving through molasses, though, on some of those strikes. And even Benavidez, at 36 years of age, has absurdly fast hands. And that's something that Askarov will have to watch out for. Benavidez, his in and out movement, along with his combinations, and really, it's not like Michael Venom Page, but it's similar. It's just Benavidez will dart in, hit you with a combination. He goes to the body, he goes to the head, and then he darts out. It's not that I'm going to dart in with a single shot looking to put you out and then get out of range. He will stand in there and engage a little bit. And if you're Askarov, you're going to want to create distance a lot in this fight. And I know what you're probably thinking, oh, well, he's the wrestler. Wouldn't he want to close the distance? I really think for Askarov, you're going to want to keep this fight on the outside and want to use your power and draw Benavidez into it. Because we saw Figueiredo did a very similar game plan. The difference is Askarov has good striking. He has good power and okay hand speed. Figueiredo has those two things just turned all the way to the max, power and hand speed. So I think Askarov will be able to catch Benavidez throughout this fight. I'm a little hesitant to see how accurate he will be throughout this fight, because I do think if Askarov does start to miss, and if he's missing early, he might get a little bit frustrated and he might start moving forward and just being a lot more hittable version of himself. And if Askarov does get a little overzealous, is just marching forward into big shots, Benavidez could crack him. And again, it's hard to say just Benavidez can knock out Askarov, but just stylistically, it could play into that outcome.
Now, for Benavidez, if he's going to get the win and he's moving in and out, again, who does Benavidez struggle with? Well, I mean, you look at some of the losses, and they're to the best guys, like, really ever. I mean, Cruz twice, he fought DJ twice, he has a win over Henry Cejudo by split decision, he has a loss to Sergio Pettis by split decision, and you go back and watch the Pettis fight, Pettis was just like that much quicker in that one.
He was.
That was it. He was just like that much quicker. Askarov isn't quicker than Benavidez. Figueiredo had the power and the speed. Askarov doesn't. This is a tricky fight, and I know a lot of people, again, money included, going with Askarov. He opened a plus 130 underdog. He's now a minus 132 favorite. For Benavidez, open a minus 150 favorite. He's now a plus 107 underdog. And as far as the votes on Tapology, listen, there's fans. Red Rover, I'm sending you over. 1,398 total votes right now, 74% Askarov and 79% for him to win by decision. The weird thing for me, Benavidez, listen, his last win was about a year and a half ago, so it's been a little bit of time. He picked up a big win over GCA Formiga. He finished him. His last two fights were 5-rounders. This one, a 3-rounder, advanced age, and he has the speed. There's a lot of things to talk about, but it's a tricky fight for either guy.
Okay, it sounds like you're thinking what I'm thinking, and I'm really happy if so. I'm actually picking Joey B in this fight. And I know it doesn't make a lot of sense if you just look at his last two performances, but again, the hand speed and the boxing combos, I really do think are going to give Askarov issues. And it's not like Askar can't catch Benavidez on the way in. I'm not saying he can't, because the power is most definitely there for him. And we've seen Benavidez get hurt in both of his last two fights. And it's not like Benavidez has the worst chin in the world, but he's been cracked before. I just think the speed is going to be a problem for Askarov. And I think this might be one of those fights where you lose this, you go back, you get better. And if these guys fought 10 times, Askarov might win 9 of them. I just think stylistically, it's a hard fight for Askarov because of the speed disadvantage. But I can openly admit, Askarov could go out there and head kick Joseph Benavidez, and I wouldn't be surprised at all.
Yeah, that's the other thing. Askarov does actually throw a lot of kicks,
exactly.
too. Like, the guy's incredibly well-rounded. So for me, I think if Askarov, if he either stays on the outside or if he just kind of marches forward, he's going to have a lot of success in this fight. And if it goes to the mat, Benavidez has very good takedown defense. He has very good defensive grappling as well. Askarov can get you in all sorts of tricky positions, so it's going to depend on control in this fight. I think that's going to be one of the big takeaways. It's either going to be the volume out of Benavidez or the control out of Askarov. And so far in his UFC fights, we've seen Askarov get wins over Elliott, who's a really tricky fighter, and Pantoja, a very, very good striker, but well-rounded with the grappling as well, and a guy that's definitely willing to take chances. You saw that at the start of the fight. And again, other than that one back take, for me, it was a lot of Askarov. It was a close fight.
Now, you say the back take, though, and this is my last point about Askarov. He gets his back taken. In 2 of the last 3 fights that he's had his back taken with a body triangle and full hooks in. Not that Benavidez is going to go out there and submit him by rear naked choke. That's disturbing, though. Like, that should be the hardest position for a guy to get, and Brandon Moreno took us back for basically 4 minutes of the last round of their fight, and Pantoja was able to get like one of the crazier transitions you will ever see. I highly recommend rewatching that fight just to see the back take, but it's a little worrying. That's all I'll say. I think Askarov is more likely to win. I just think stylistically it's a tough one for him.
I think the guy's more likely to win, but I'm not picking him. I'm going with the guy that's more likely to win. I'm going with the younger man who's still undefeated at this point. My guy, Askarov, to get the win. It should be a good fight. You've got Benavidez. I've got Askarov. Really looking forward to this one in the entire card. 3 title fights up at the top. You've got Blachowicz, Adesanya. You've got Anderson taking on Nunes. Huge underdog. And then, of course, Petr Yan taking on the man himself, Aljamain Sterling. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt. As we always say, let's get into it. Big time fight at bantamweight. We have the Matrix, Kyler Phillips, taking on China's Song Yadong. And we consider this a possible fight of the night because for Kyler Phillips, he flows through fighting. I mean, he's calm, he's cool, he's got the hair. He kind of moves around, kind of sketchy, but not like the guy, Tim Elliott. But he'll switch stances. Very good at grappling, very good in the transitions. Kyler Phillips, a very complete martial artist, which might surprise a lot of people because you look at the 5 on in, and he's 3-2. He's won his last 3. He lost 2 in a row. He lost to, Canada's Brad Katona on The Ultimate Fighter about 3 years ago. But the guy's only 25 years old. He goes in the regional scene, loses split decision to Victor Henry. Good fighter, but a bit of a surprise for a lot of people. He wins on LFA, and then he comes into the UFC and he fights Gabriel Silva, who's no longer in the UFC. He just got released. He was the younger brother of Eric Silva. Both prospects forever. So for Kyler Phillips in that fight, a very good one. It was a fight of the night performance in that one. And then his last time out, it was a performance of the night win over Cameron Ellis. Now let me tell you this, man. Cameron Ellis from the UK, had a win over Paddy Pimblett. He kind of bounced around between gyms, spent some time at Jackson Wink, spent some time at the BMF Ranch. Cameron Ellis was not good. And you could see it in that fight. He was really tentative. He was biting on everything. Kyler Phillips looked amazing in that fight. Song Yadong's taken on the much higher level of competition. You look at his 5 on in, Felipe Arantes, Vince Morales, Alejandro Perez, where you're not going to see a more disgusting knockout. I mean, listen, I implore you, Aaron Pico, John DeJesus, if you want to see a gross overhand right, but the right cross that Song Yadong has against Alejandro Perez, a real veteran of the division. Huge win for him there. Perez, if I'm not mistaken, was ranked in that one.
He was.
He had the close fight against Cody Stamann, and then his last time out, it was up at 45. He took on Marlon Vera, and he picked up a big decision win. It was a really close fight, and that's the thing. You have a really close fight against Marlon Vera 9 months ago, and then we haven't seen Song Yadong. Marlon Vera then went on to fight and picked up a big win and fought Sean O'Malley, and then he lost to Jose Aldo. That could have been Song Yadong, and now we're here and we're fighting Kyler Phillips. How weird is that?
Could have been you, Song, but you out here playing. No, it is weird. This is a super fun fight because we know out of his last 2 fights with Song Yadong, he's a phenomenal striker. He really is. If he threw 5 strikes more per round, he would probably win unanimous decisions in both of those, and there wouldn't be all this controversy around the decisions.
Well, he did his last time, but
he did his last
close fight.
Exactly, and a lot of people did think Vera won it. Go back to the Stamann fight, though. Every moment that fight was on the feet, Song Yadong was winning. He has great combos. He's a really good long-range striker, too, and the Perez fight is a great example of that. He doesn't have to be one of these boxers who's chest-to-chest, like a Carlos Felipe, if you will. He can fight at range and really set up his straight shots, and when he's on and when he is flowing, because that's what we talk about with Kyler Phillips, when he's in that flow state, he's hard to beat, because he's so well-rounded, but he is so unorthodox that you're just always going to have a different look being thrown at you. Song Yadong, just very good at the basics. It's just, I really wish he had a slightly higher level of output because when he does let his hands go, he's so successful. And he's another fighter too. When he throws in combination, he will land every time. But when he tries to stick to his single shots and he's a little bit lazy with it, he's not able to land as much. We saw that even in the Vera fight. Vera would land 5, 6, 7 punches, but the 1 or 2 that Yadong would hit him with, they just seem so much more impactful. And in this fight, I think it could be a very similar case where you have Kyler Phillips going out there, throwing a lot of kicks, throwing a lot of his unique techniques, and then Yadong just kind of cutting through a lot of that, throwing his straight shots. So at the end of this fight, I could see this being a very controversial decision either way, because I could see this, you look at the stats afterwards and, oh, well, Kyler Phillips, he outstruck him 90 to 63, but when you actually look at it, the 60 that Yadong landed are much more impactful. I could see this being another controversial decision, which is kind of wild.
It's a tricky one because, again, for Kyler Phillips, flows this not, let's say he's out of an orthodox stance. He throws a lot of low kicks and leg kicks. Song Yadong stands very tall, and he has huge, like we talked about it, Amanda Lemos, Livinha Souza. You look at Lemos' lower half, it's huge. Song Yadong has a huge lower half, big base for all that power to crack forward, almost like a baseball player. And for Kyler Phillips, if he can, oh, this is so terrible. We'll not say baseball bat. We'll say like a field hockey stick. If he just takes it and chops him, just brings it out and starts chopping away at that lead leg, he could cause problems for Song Yadong and really take away the power. And that's the thing. How good can Song Yadong be from the opposite stance? Will we see him from that stance in this fight? Because I know from Kyler Phillips, offensively, and more importantly, defensively, he's pretty good from both stances.
And that is going to be the unique thing about this fight, because I do expect Yadong to have to switch stance at some point, whether it's just a decision that he makes during the fight to give Kyler a different look, or just because his lead leg does get so beat up. The issue with a lot of the kicks that Phillips throws is he throws naked leg kicks. And I know that's a Joe Rogan term sometimes, but he will just stand and throw the kick without setting it up. Now, if he sets it up with his hands and then uses his kicks to end his combination, kind of like a Carlos Condit or even a Holly Holm, he's going to land, and he's going to land with a lot of force. When he does throw just those single shots and the single kicks, look for the counters of Song Yadong coming straight down the middle. I'm going to bring up Poirier Gaethje. Gaethje lands so many leg kicks in that fight, but by the 4th round, Poirier gets his timing down to where he checks the kick, plants, and meets him with a straight shot right down the middle. And you see what that's able to do, especially when your opponent's moving into your power. You're going to be able to hurt them bad. And I do think Song Yadong is the more powerful out of these two. I think Kyler Phillips, yes, he can finish you, but a lot of his finishes do come from, I'm going to wrestle you, I'm going to make you tired, I'm going to volume you. There's just a lot more to deal with when you're fighting a guy like Phillips, whereas Yadong knows what he's good at. He gets it done with his bread and butter. It's his boxing, it's his combinations, it's his accuracy too. And that's what makes this fight really hard to predict, because for Kyler Phillips, let's say he goes out there and has a very kick-heavy game plan, he shoots a few takedowns, it really makes Song Yadong guess. That's the best way to fight him. But if you go out there and just try to kickbox with Song Yadong, unless you are one of those upper echelon guys in the division, you're going to have a really tough outing against him. And that's what makes this fight so fun. It could be a quick flash knockout for Yadong. It could be the same thing for Phillips. Like, this fight could be so many different results, and that's what makes it so fun.
And two of the better gyms, and from Team Alpha Male, you know them for a lot of these guys in lower weight classes. For Kyler Phillips coming in here from MMA Lab, well, we already talked about it. He has 2 teammates on this card, Mario Bautista and Casey Kenney, in the same weight class, on the same card. So you know exactly what you're training for. With Casey Kenney's taking on Cruz. Volume, takedowns, maybe. You look at the fight that Mario Bautista has against Trevin Jones. Well, he's probably going to need the takedowns, and he's probably going to need a little bit of volume too. So for Kyler Phillips, I would expect volume and takedowns and the leg kicks. And if he can bring all of those together, there's a chance that Kyler Phillips gets a win here. I like Song Yadong in this fight, though. A guy that's 23 years old, and if he keeps working on the takedown defense at Team Alpha Male, where that's what they do, he should continue to have a lot of success in the UFC. So if we look at the Tapology votes, I was surprised because I just brought it up. 1,325 total votes, 80% for Song Yadong, 59% by decision, 33% by knockout. For the 20% that have Phillips, 72% have him to win by decision. If we look at the odds map, Phillips open to plus 165 underdog. He's now to plus 125. And if you look at Song Yadong, open to minus 190. He's now to minus 151. So the money is coming in on Phillips. The fan vote is on Song Yadong. Again, I have China's Song Yadong in this fight. I really like those boxing combinations. I like the forward pressure. He has the win over Vera. He's faced a guy like Stamen. Like, it's just a matter of time before, you know, you get a big name. I'm honestly kind of surprised that it's Kyler Phillips here. And that's not to throw shade at Phillips. I think Phillips is a good fighter. It's just I expected like a top 15 guy, not a guy that's fighting outside of the top 15, whose wins come over a guy that's not very good and a guy that's not in the UFC anymore.
Okay, I agree with some of what you said, and I should say this. I agree with a lot of what you said. I do think Kyler Phillips is deserving of a top 15 guy because you look at the way that he can fight and his full potential, and I do think that's what this matchup is. And same thing, Sung Yadong, if you really want to put everything against him, he's on a 2-fight losing streak. Now, I don't agree with that, but if you really want to be cynical looking at his record, he probably should have lost the Stamen fight, and the Vera fight was as close to a draw as you can possibly have. Those guys fought a very even fight. I like Yadong in this fight, and I do think it's going to be weird for Song Yadong because at bantamweight, there's so many wrestle boxers. And if they just went out there to box with him, boy, would he have a lot of success. But then you look at the guys like Jimmy Rivera and the Cody Stamens who already holds a draw over Yadong, if you will. Those are the guys who are really going to give him issues. So I do expect him to win this fight, probably in impressive fashion if we're being honest. And then he'll probably get another chance to fight a top 15 guy.
I mean, listen, when Marlon Vera lost to Sung Yadong and they raised his arm, Yadong went to kind of give him the fist bump. Marlon Vera went over and went right into the microphone. Nah, that. So we'll see what happens in this one. I'm not saying that. I'm going Sung Yadong in this fight. You're going Sung Yadong as well. It should be a great fight on a great card. 3 title fights up at the top. So keep it locked in with Fighting Picks, Matt, as we always say. Let's get into it. Big time fight at bantamweight. We have the former champ, the Dominator, Dominick Cruz, taking on Megan Anderson's #1 fan. We're talking Casey Kenney. This should be a great fight, Matt, because for Dominick Cruz, it's been forever ago since he got his last win. Matt, I wrote it down. It was UFC 199, Rocco Bisbing 2.
Trilogy.
The #1 song in the world was I Need a One Dance, in my hand. You know that Drake song.
You
that
like
kind
it,
of
Craig.
flash in the pan. But Dominick Cruz, big win there, and then that's the thing. So he won that fight 4 years and 8 months ago, and then he lost the decision to Cody Garbrandt. And it has to be mentioned, the activity or lack thereof from Dominick Cruz, because he fought 3 times in 2016. He won twice, he lost to Cody Garbrandt in impressive fashion, and then he was out due to a litany of injuries. And he came back last year, and he fought Henry Cejudo, and at the start of it, you get that classic, okay, Dominick Cruz, we're going to move really weird. Everything's taped up, but we're doing the figure 8.
Everything is taped up.
We're figure 8 throwing kind of single shots, but figure 8 and figuring out distance and what we can do against Cejudo. Cejudo went in there with not like your Ryobi chainsaw. He went out, bought the steel like they have in the commercials.
Steel?
Bought a Husqvarna, like you know, and he went out there and just chopped down those legs. And once he chopped down the base, I mean, it was all about the base.
I'm going to quote Teddy Atlas. You gotta put water in the basement if you're fighting Dominick Cruz. It is the key to beating him. You look at the guys who've had success over Dominick Cruz. You need counter wrestling because that's his get out of jail free card. When you start to have success on the feet, he goes for the takedown. And you will not take down Dominick Cruz. It's basically impossible to take down Cruz because A, he has such a great wrestling background, but the footwork kind of plays into his wrestling defense. And it's something we talk about sometimes when you have a fighter who, they're a really good striker, they might not have the wrestling defense, but just the way that they strike kind of helps them defend takedowns. Caitlin Chukagian's a decent example because of just how far away she is able to stand. Dominick Cruz has both of those. He has the phenomenal wrestling himself, and he has the phenomenal footwork and defense to really counter whatever wrestling game plan is brought to him. And that's how you know he's a great wrestler. An Olympic gold medalist thought it would be easier to kick him in the legs than take him down to beat him. Henry Cejudo was one of the greatest wrestlers to ever be in MMA, and even he thought, well, why would I try taking this guy down? It's easier to strike with him. I think that's probably the ultimate compliment that you can give to Dominick Cruz's wrestling. A, I don't think I've ever seen him get taken down, and B, he took down TJ Dillashaw. Dominick Cruz is an absurd grappler, and I don't think he gets the respect for that.
And Dominick Cruz is one of those guys that came into MMA with a wrestling base and became a kickboxer. And if you look at TJ Dillashaw, same thing with him. He came into MMA as a wrestler. Mark Munoz kind of just found him out there in the school.
Mark Munoz found a buffet line, too.
And then he became... Oh, boy. Poor Mark.
I'm sorry, Mark.
And then Dillashaw became, Bang Muay Thai systems. So if you look at Dominick Cruz... The weird thing for him, though, and that was the thing that I had written down, was the fact that he had those 3 fights in 2016, lost, injuries, 2020 was really his comeback. But then you look at it. He fought twice in 2011. He fought once in 2014, 3 times in 2016, once in 2020. Those are his only UFC fights. Like, he hasn't fought with the UFC a lot. He was a big WEC guy. He's the best bantamweight of all time. I know. But he hasn't had a lot of UFC fights. It's kind of crazy. And for Casey Kenney, since he's come into the UFC from LFA, he punched his ticket with that knee up the middle against Vince Cachero. He's had a great run. And he's fought good opponents. His 5 on in, Manny Bermudez, Merab Dvalishvili, got way out wrestled. Luis Smolka, the one-arm guillotine, where it was the Smolka effect on his back. He beats Haile Elateng. He beats Nathaniel Wood. Now, The Nathaniel Wood fight was a fight of the night, and I could watch it every single weekend on Sunday, Tuesday morning, whatever. It's a great fight. It's a close fight, too. I thought Kenney was able to get the win in that one, but it was a very close fight. The fight before that, you look at it, he beats Haile Alatang, he beats him by decision. He beat the shit out of Haile Alatang in that fight. He beat him so bad. So for Casey Kenney, he's a wrestler at the end of the day. He's coming out of his southpaw stance. His last fight was catchweight at 140, and he doesn't, say the nicest things about Megan Anderson on podcasts. But when you're with Tim Welch and Sean O'Malley, you might say some questionable things. That happens.
Some substances shared around before filming.
You probably shouldn't say those things, though. No, you know what? Not probably. You shouldn't say those things. But Casey Kenney's a pretty darn good fighter, and that's why he's matched up with Dominick Cruz here.
I'm so excited for this fight. I really am. I don't think this is my favorite fight on the card just because it's such a stacked card. But if this fight really was on any other card, let's be honest, this should have main evented last weekend's fight night. Like, Cyril Gahn and Jairzinho, give them as much press as you want to, but please only make that a 3-round fight. And give me 5 rounds of Casey Kenney, Dominick Cruz, because I do think the cardio is the big thing about Casey Kenney that I don't have all the answers to that I would like to. I know how good his wrestling is. I know how good his defensive wrestling is. His striking, very heavy-handed, but he will throw in combination too. And I love the kicking game of Casey Kenney because he doesn't just spam his kicks. He's very efficient with them to the point until he gets tired. And that's the weird thing about Kenney. You talk about the Nathaniel Wood fight. First of all, just a phenomenal fight and a very high-skill fight between those two. A very technical fight. And Casey Kenney does great in the first round, does great in the second round, but you can tell that by the last minute or 30 seconds of that round, he is starting to breathe a little bit heavier, and Nathaniel Wood's starting to put it on him a little bit.
They said at the end of the first round that he was tired.
They did, but you could definitely tell that in the third round, Casey Kenney, it was a lot more him fighting off Nathaniel Wood's attack than him really forcing the fight to Nathaniel Wood, and that's what made that fight so entertaining. The thing for Kenney, though, is okay, that could have been the jet lag because you did fight 3 weeks before. You flew back to the States and then you went back to Fight Island. That was a big talking point in that fight. But when you have when your cardio starts to fail you a little bit against a guy like Nathaniel Wood, who I'm very high on. I know he probably shouldn't still be called the prospect, but in my heart he is. When you start to get tired against a guy like that, if you're throwing at Dominick Cruz and missing consistently, especially throughout those first 2 rounds when you're at your most dangerous, that third round's going to be hell because he can take you down. He can make you miss an awful lot. And if you haven't invested a lot in those leg kicks early on, which, let's be honest, I fully expect Casey Kenney to do, then it's going to be a really interesting fight in that third round because we saw Nathaniel Wood slowly able to start taking over in that. Well, Dominick Cruz has much better cardio than Nathaniel Wood, and he has a much higher output, and he has a much higher sustained output than Wood. So I think this is one of those weird fights where they're kind of playing into the veteran and what he can do against the young up-and-comer. Normally it's the other way around. They want to give the up-and-comer a good stylistic matchup. This is sort of the opposite. Now, I understand Dominick Cruz, it's the inactivity. He didn't look great against Cejudo, but when you look at fighters who he has a lot of success against, it's heavy power punchers who do tend to get tired. But what atmosphere is he normally in? A 5-round atmosphere where he can give up a round and then start to come back as the fight progresses. And that's what's interesting about this. Dominick Cruz, to me, is a 5-round fighter. The majority of his wins are decision. He's not going out there finishing many people. If he does get behind 2 rounds in this fight and it does go into that third and last round, I don't know if Dominick Cruz can stop Casey Kenney in that third round to have a big comeback.
The last time that Dominick Cruz had a fight that was 3 rounds was against Takeya Mitsugaki back in September of 2014, UFC 178. It's been so long. Do I think Dominick Cruz can't win a 3-round fight? Well, in that one, he knocked him out in the first round. Takeya, a little bit long in the tooth, but both of them really were at that point. And then you watch and you see Dominick Cruz, well, he go on to beat Dillashaw, beat Faber, and of course lose his last 2. The injuries are a problem. The other thing, and you brought it up, the fact that Cruz used to a 5-round atmosphere where you don't have to sprint in the first. You don't really have to sprint in the third or the second, but the third, the fourth, the fifth, you can really start to bring everything together. And if you've seen a Dominick Cruz fight, the first round, he feels you out on the feet. He does the figure 8. He does all, kind of like an Ali shuffle. He'll kind of screw around for lack of a better term.
Faber for the third time wished you did that.
Takes a little bit of time in the first round, normally. And then he gets cooking. Against Casey Kenney usually brings the fight to you early. So that's what makes this interesting. Can Dominick Cruz outlast Casey Kenney? Can Casey Kenney's cardio kind of keep up in the third round? Over on Tapology, 1,440 total votes, 71% Cruz, 88% by decision. If we have a look at the odds, Matt, Cruz open a minus 115 favorite. He's now plus 111 underdog. If we look at Kenney, open a minus 105, now at a minus 137. Money is on Casey Kenney. The fans are with Cruz. This is this whole card. The money's on the other guy. The fans are with this guy. So the fans have the former champ, the greatest bantamweight of all time. The money is in Casey Kenney's court. What are you thinking?
This is going to be one of those fights where a lot of people are going to be mad at me in my Twitter DMs. I think Dominick Cruz is going to win by decision. I really do. No, I don't. That's a joke. Casey Kenney's going to win this fight, let's be honest. Dominick Cruz hasn't had a win in almost 4.5 years.
Oh, more than that.
Exactly. If you're not able to do something in 4.5 years, I would normally say you're not very good at it, but I won't disrespect Dominick Cruz like that. It's just with all that layoff, I don't know what the best version of Dominick Cruz is anymore. I've only seen him lose in recent memory. Yes, you go back and you look at the Uriah Faber fight from UFC 199. Michael Bisping won the middleweight title the last time Dominick Cruz got a win. Michael Bisping's been retired for what's felt like years, and that's really concerning for Cruz. Maybe he goes out there, maybe he can use the footwork, and we see one of those classic Dominick Cruz fights, but I just don't see it personally. I think the sport somewhat passed him by. And again, look at the last win he had against Faber. Faber himself was a guy who hadn't really shifted with the sport, and the sport was starting to pass him by when they fought for the third time. Dominick Cruz is still from that era, I think, and I do think these newer, more well-rounded martial artists are going to give him trouble because Dominick Cruz's footwork isn't unique anymore. It's been out for a long time. You've had, 4.5 years to just look at his last 2 losses, I guess. Like, there's just enough out there on Dominick Cruz that I don't think what he does is that unique anymore for modern MMA.
And it's kind of tricky for me. Now, I'm not going to be that critical, but I will say, you look at Cruz, his last fight was against, well, again, you say the best bantamweight of all times, Cruz. Where's Henry Cejudo? Because he was a champ at bantamweight and had impressive wins. He was a champ at flyweight. And did he beat DJ? Well, he did. At the end of the day, it's a W in the win column. And he beat Dominick Cruz in,
TJ.
I would say, impressive fashion. I do think that was an impressive win. Now, I went back and watched it because they said as it was live, well, was it really unanswered and this and that? There were 13 shots that Cejudo was able to land after he dropped them, and he just kept hammering away. I don't care about Keith Peterson. Listen, I helped Keith Peterson in Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada, figure out where his hotel room was.
I was there. It happened.
Keith Peterson, the poison dwarf. But again, I do think Kenney is going to be able to get the win. If he can invest in the leg kicks early and the combinations and press a pace early for the first 2 rounds, it's a Kenney win. So we're both going with Kenney. You can just get mad at us in the comment section. We'll see what happens. But we're both going with the MMA Labs, Casey Kenney, to get the win. Overall, really looking forward to this card. Our main card has a lot of great fights on it and 3 title fights up at the top. So keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt, as we always say. Let's get into it. Big time banger at light heavyweight. We have Maheta Thiago Santos taking on Aleksandar Rakic, a guy that represents Serbia and Austria, taking on the Brazilian. And for Thiago Santos, Matt, I can think back to this guy at 185 fighting jobbers, finishing them impressively.
Jack Marshman.
Sometimes losing to them impressively. Like, it was just kind of weird for Thiago Santos. He's kind of in no man's land. And then just like former foe Anthony Smith, he had a resurgence. And if you look at the 5 on in, 3 wins to 2 losses. He finishes Eric Anders. He finishes Jimmy Manuwa. He finishes Jan Blachowicz. And then he loses split decision to John Jones. And then he loses last time out against Glover Teixeira. He dropped Glover in the first. He dropped him again right until he got finished himself. And for Thiago Santos, it was a different game plan his last fight, because what he did was he took his normal stance and he did some of the things that he normally does. And I know he'll speak to, well, when he's going for a wheel kick, you usually see this out of him. But the thing that he did in that fight was he had a lot of feints with his hips. He did a lot of movement of the hips where he was trying to fake out Glover where, am I going to go to the legs? Am I going to go to the head? And in the end, he didn't. He boxed with him. And that's pretty much what Thiago Santos did in that fight. He did not throw a lot of kicks whatsoever against Glover Teixeira. Maybe it had to do with the wrestling. Probably had to do with the wrestling. But he didn't throw a lot of kicks. I'll talk more about those a little bit later on. For Rakic, his last time out was his first main event. But it wasn't any normal main event. It was a 3-round main event against Anthony Smith where, well, he dominated him pillar to post. He absolutely out-wrestled him. He outstruck him for the brief period that it was on the feet. And if you look at his 5 on in, 4-1, a win over Ledet, a win over Devin Clark where he finished him, a win over Jimmy Manuwa, and then the split decision loss to Volkan Oezdemir that, well, really he should have won. So you can consider Rakic as 5-0 coming in. For Santos, maybe you think he's 4-1 coming in and he actually did beat John Jones. I'm not going to give you a strong argument either way. I think he's an absolute warhorse for going through that fight with 2 bad knees, and they were caused in that fight. So I think. The weird thing for Santos, though, we talked about it in the Teixeira fight. Everybody called us crazy for picking Teixeira. I did the whole...
No. Sorry, I get to pat myself on the back.
You picked the round.
And the method.
All right. But we both picked Glover to win. Point is, we did the whole social media deep dive. Santos is coming in off of 2 bad knees. You didn't see a lot of kicks in any of the videos. You saw Capoeira, but there were 2 videos just from different angles that he posted on Instagram where you thought, oh, okay, well, maybe the knees are all right. But the weird thing for me, and again, probably because it was a wrestler against Glover Teixeira, but when he fought Blachowicz, 26 of his 36 total kicks landed to the legs. 27 of 53 against Jones to the legs. 2 leg kicks in 3 rounds against Glover Teixeira, and that was it. And we saw the feints with the hips, but we hardly saw any kicks out of Santos, high, low, or anywhere. I would think against a guy like Rakic, who boxes very well, he has a long stance, Rakic does, but he's very heavy on his feet. He moves well, but he is flat-footed, and he's heavy on his lead leg. If it was the Santos of, let's say 2019, he'd probably be chopping away at Rakic's legs, because Rakic, for what it's worth, you'd think is a typical striker. But man, the guy's got a pretty good ground game, and he's a pretty good wrestler.
This is the thing I always talk about when I talk about Aleksandar Rakic, and I will bring this up till the day I die. Aleksandar Rakic is one of the few MMA fighters who uses his athleticism as a skill. It's not something a lot of fighters do, and for baseball you can be really good at, and you don't really have to be that athletic. If you are extremely athletic, though, then you go down as one of the kind of like the all-time greats. Like if you're built like Mike Trout and you're already good at baseball, you're just gonna be that much better. Aleksandar Rakic has the skills, don't get me wrong, but he's one of those fighters who, it's just his drive is up to 100, and I do think that matters. Some guys in MMA don't try their hardest for every minute of every fight, and some guys are happy to take not only minutes off, but sometimes even rounds off. Aleksandar Rakic does not have that issue. He is constantly going to be in your face, and sometimes that will be to his detriment. I do think when he fights a 5-round fight, eventually that will get to him, because he does have such a crazy output that if you are able to defend his takedowns at a certain point, you might be able to expose him on the feet a little bit. But like you had said, Aleksandar Rakic, pretty darn good boxer. He has really good kicks too, really powerful kicker as well, and this is the thing. He's arguably the biggest a light heavyweight can possibly get. Like, Aleksandar Rakic is a massive light heavyweight.
If you see him in the embeddeds, look at the guy's legs. They're huge.
Exactly. And that's something that is really important, because when he fights other wrestlers, and I say other wrestlers because, yes, he is a striker, but he is a wrestling heavy striker in MMA, especially. If he thinks that the grappling is the best path to victory, he is not afraid to take that. And that's the worst case scenario for Thiago Santos. Because for Santos, yes, we talk about the kicks, we talk about the extreme power. The lack of kicks in the Glover fight was because he was on his back for the majority of it, and you can't kick off your back when some guy's on top of you, kind of just pummeling you, because when they were on the feet, he'd hurt Glover with a punch, go to the ground with him immediately, and then Glover, in classic Glover Teixeira fashion, get dropped, get into mount, win a fight. Glover, never change. But for Santos, the lack of ACLs in that fight and really just explosiveness off his back is concerning, and that can be settled in 2 different areas. You can say, hey, Glover Teixeira from top position, one of the better top mount guys in the division, really in the UFC. He's got great ground and pound. We saw that in the Smith fight. He's got amazing submissions. Thiago Santos figured that one out himself. But on the feet, every second you spend with Thiago Santos, he is a problem. He can throw overhand, straight shots, is not afraid to mix up his timing. He can mix up his stance. There's just a lot that Thiago Santos is going to throw at you on the feet. The problem is, you don't really got to get worried about getting knocked out if you can take him down. And we have seen Santos really struggle off of his back. And I hate to say make rookie mistakes, but it is the case. Go back and watch that Eric Spicely fight. Thiago Santos just tries to explode up to his feet with no technique whatsoever.
You're not Derek Lewis.
No, exactly. You're not Derek Lewis. There's only a handful of fighters who can really get away with that just get up style. And Santos, yes, he is an extremely explosive MMA fighter, but he's not good enough technically to just get away with doing that. And I know they're going to say, he's a black belt in jiu-jitsu. I can buy a black belt at Walmart too. And Thiago Santos, again, I'm not going to be that harsh on his jiu-jitsu, but he is one of those fighters who you hear about the black belt in jiu-jitsu, but you never really see it in MMA. And that's
Shogun.
what... Yeah, same thing. Again, Shogun is the same thing. Rakic is one of those fighters who can mix it up very well. And if he is having trouble on the feet, let's say Santos is starting to land on Rakic, he can immediately just shoot a double leg. And I do think it's as easy as just shoot a double leg. Because for Santos, if you get him down, you can hold him down. Yes, he will fight the initial takedown attempt, but similar to a Alexander Gustafsson, he's always the first fighter who comes to my mind. He's got great takedown defense. He has a great first move to get back up to his feet. But after you can kind of neutralize those 2 weapons, you can hold him down. Santos is very similar that way. He's got a great first attack. He's very physically strong. But if you chain wrestle him at all, he doesn't have the grappling IQ to really keep up with your attack. And for Rakic, it's not as easy as, oh, we'll just back up Thiago Santos, because you are going to be in danger at some point while doing that. But it is, we'll just back up Thiago Santos. If you get us back to the cage, he's not going to have the range to get off his power. He's not going to have the distance to really use his big power kicks. And you're going to force us into an ugly fight against a guy who likes to come out clean. So I really do like Aleksandar Rakic in this.
And I know we're going to talk about this fight time and again, especially in our main event. But you look at Thiago Santos' fight against Jan Blachowicz, and what did he do well? Well, he mixed it up, and he threw a lot of kicks. I talked about them. He threw a lot of kicks.
In that fight, he did a great job with his own footwork. And I do think that's another thing that suffered from his ACLs is we don't see that left to right as much. And it is weird for Santos because he can fight from both stances, but the main power he has is from that left side. And here's the thing. He can definitely knock out with his right leg. I'm not saying he can't, but the majority of what Santos does comes from the left side. And with his kicks, he's the weirdest kicker in MMA. I think that's fair to say because his kicks are somewhat telegraphed. Like, you're not going to have to wonder where his kicks are coming from. He does wind them up, like you had mentioned. He does have that weird hip movement that's very capoeira-esque. But when he throws a kick, he will kind of Cowboy Cerrone, Miles Jury when he was on the ground, really wind it up and throw it into you because he knows if you catch that on the arm, if you catch that on the leg, it doesn't matter what Thiago Santos hits with that leg. It's going to damage you, and that's an important point to bring up.
And I mean, really, Matt, who had the better performance against Jimmy Manuwa? That's the question.
Aleksandar Rakic basically put him into the upside down, but then so did Thiago Santos, so I really don't know.
They were both really good fights. For me, again, it comes down to the fact that Rakic needs a big step up. This is probably the step up, and for Santos, if he gets the win, he has a ton of power. Again, you can always point back to, well, who was the last guy with power that probably shouldn't have won, but did win? It was Derek Lewis when he fought Curtis Blades. So can Thiago Santos beat Rakic? 100%. I'd like to see leg kicks out of him. Like I said, Rakic can be a little flat-footed out there, and you can land on that lead leg. Rakic is a great boxer. He can kick too. He's a good kickboxer. But Thiago Santos definitely has the heavier kicks, the better kicks. I just like to see them. I like that ground game out of Rakic, though, in this.
Last point for me. Thiago Santos, at middleweight at least, very questionable chin. Now, I don't think that's as much of an issue at 205, but again, something I thought of, so I should probably bring it to you guys. He does seem to get hit clean quite a bit, and that does concern me. Even go back to the Jimmy Manuwa fight. Yes, he beat Jimmy Manuwa, but remember that fight. He got tired through a bunch of telegraph techniques, got cracked himself, but was, of course, able to overcome it and knock him out in the second round. He is able to get hit clean, though, and against a guy like Rakic, who is that constant force, and he's always got that pressure coming forwards, I see Rakic probably clipping Santos with a hard shot, getting him down to the mat, and really just dominating him from there.
Matt, if we have a look at the odds in this one, might be a little bit of a surprise. Santos open to plus 185. Underdog, he's now to plus 132. Money coming in on Santos. Rakic open to minus 265. He's now to minus 159 or thereabouts. And if we have a look at the Tapology votes, they're close. 1,459 of them, 62% Rakic. 51% of fans have him to win by decision. The 38% that have Santos, 70% by knockout. I can see that for the fans that have Santos. I have Rakic here.
I like Rakic as well. I think he's going to be a future champ one day. I really do. Like, that's the ceiling I have for Aleksandar Rakic. He's my serial god at 205, and I'm not afraid to say that right now.
Oh, boy. All right, Matt. High praise for Rakic. If he gets knocked out, donkey. All right, we're both going with Aleksandar Rakic, again, representing Austria and Serbia in this one. Really looking forward to another great fight, and overall 3 title fights on this one. You also have Makhachev taking on Dober, so don't miss that. Matt, keep it locked in with Fighting Picks, and as we always say, let's get into it. Big time fight at lightweight. We have Islam Makhachev taking on Drew Dober. And listen, this is a weird one because Islam Makhachev was due for his first first fight night headliner against Rafael dos Anjos. Makhachev out on short notice. Paul Felder gets the call up, has the mustache. You know the whole story there. But Makhachev now draws Drew Dober, and it's weird because for Islam Makhachev, you look at the 5 on in, and we're talking about decent names. Nick Lentz, Gleison Tebow, Cajun Johnson, Arman Zarukian on short notice, Davi Hamosh. None of them ranked, but all of them wins, and the Zarukian one was close. If you look at Drew Dober, he beats John Tuck, and he outworks them the whole time, loses to Beneil Dariush, beats Polo Reyes, beats Nazar Hakparas, knocks out Alexander Hernandez. Matt, what do you think about Alexander Hernandez?
I recently did a recap show, and I believe you go to minute 44 on the dot of that recap show. You can find out for yourself, but I'm not a big fan.
Not a big fan. All right, so Matt's not a big fan of Alexander Hernandez, but Drew Dober totally outboxed him, had him dead to rights for about 30 seconds, just continued to hammer away and throw hooks. Drew Dober, very good stand-up. A guy that, if you asked me, a year and a half, 2 years ago, if Drew Dober would A, be at lightweight, B, maybe even in the UFC, I'd sit there and scratch my head because he had a hard time making the weight. California State Athletic Commission recommended the move up to welterweight. He stuck it out at lightweight, and it's been good since then, really. And for Drew Dober, good stand-up. He's really tricky to try and get a read on. It's hard to move in on Drew Dober. For Islam Makhachev, a lot of long, drawn-out strikes. Like, not drawn-out, but very long strikes. You've seen him and known him in the UFC for a very long time. That's the thing. These guys have been around the block for a long time. If you look at it for Islam Makhachev, he had a huge win in his debut. And then the only loss that he has is a really, really big-time loss. Like a big, big loss.
Islam Makhachev has had the oddest career at lightweight, and there's been a lot of weird careers there. But again, you look at the guys who he's beaten, none of them really stand out.
Well, he beat Leo Kuntz in his debut.
He did beat Leo Kuntz, who tweets a lot now, I guess, and lost to a guy who tried to lose the fight on purpose. But anyways, he's had a lot of good opportunities in the UFC against some upper echelon competition. But either he gets hurt or his opponent gets hurt, or there's always some kind of circumstance kind of around a big Islam Makhachev fight. And he was a 5-1 favorite over RDA when he was supposed to fight him. Like, you have to realize he was probably going to beat Rafael dos Anjos.
Big favorite in this one, too.
Exactly. And if he beat RDA back then, you're only on to great things afterwards. Like, RDA right now, he's probably going to fight like a Michael Chandler or someone in that top 5 of lightweight. That could have all been Makhachev's shine, but unfortunately wasn't able to compete that night. And now he's fighting Drew Dober, who fights a little bit like RDA. He does like to use his wrestling offensively and counter wrestling. But the weird thing about Dober is his last 3 wins are really impressive and they're nice, but there has been sort of a story of 2 different careers with Drew Dober. And that Benavidez Dariush fight was really the difference between it. And I would say he went into the Dariush fight with his newer style that is much more aggressive. Because go back and watch the Dariush fight. Drew Dober's having great success on the feet. He lands a big shot up top. He lands a beautiful left hook to the body that actually hurts Dariush quite bad. But the problem is we talk about get out of jail free cards. Benavidez Dariush, one of the best ones. He's got some of the best jiu-jitsu. And once he was able to take the fight to the mat, Dariush, he can always think 1, 2, 3 moves ahead of his opponent. You could tell that Drew Dober wasn't ready for that kind of test at that stage of his career. And then you look at now. Drew Dober, beautiful boxing, really good timing, and he doesn't bite on feints a lot. He knows what he's good at and what he's not good at, and I think that's one of the most important things an MMA fighter can have. Drew Dober's not going to go out there and try to throw, a very body kick heavy attack and look to take his opponent down all of a sudden. Drew Dober, great takedown defense, really good boxing on the feet, but I do think his power is a little bit deceptive. I think a lot of people look at his recent knockouts and TKOs and think, oh, Drew Dober has good power in the lightweight division. I think if he catches you clean, he can put you down, but I do think the story of Drew Dober's career, he's more decision-oriented than he is knockout-oriented, and for Makhachev, the only time I've even seen him lose was that one knockout loss. And other than that, other than the Zarukian fight where Arman was able to grapple with him a little bit and keep the fight close on the mat, he kind of dominates everyone else. And there haven't been too many close Islam Makhachev fights, which makes it hard for me to see what Drew Dober can do to really make this an even fight. If he brings it up to the feet, I think Makhachev has enough power to sort of make this fight even a bit when it does come to the striking exchanges. So for me, I look more to what can Drew Dober do to counter the attack of Makhachev throughout this fight.
If you go back and watch the fight that Makhachev had against Adriano Martins, it's against a southpaw striker with tons of power. Martins, as Makhachev goes in, lands his beautiful right counter, and it's amazing and knocks him. Like, it's just a flash knockdown. Referee runs in. Makhachev gets up, slams his hand. He's mad, whatever. But you look at Makhachev, 7-1 so far in the UFC since he came in 2015. For Dober, he came in 2013. Been around the block, and that's the thing. I mean, he's taken on some good names. You look at those last 3 and you talk about them. Big prospect in Nasrat Hakparas, but as well, Alexander Hernandez, Polo Reyes, wins over Frank Camacho, John Tuck, Josh Berkman, a little long in the tooth. Losses to Dariush, OAM, PFL Zone, Efrain Escudero, Nick Hine, and his debut, Sean Spencer. He did have a fight against Leandro Silva. Wish we saw more Leandro Silva in the UFC. The weird thing for me and Drew Dober, and this was a big talking point, is the fact that Camacho, Dariush, and Hernandez all took him down. And I would expect in a fight like this, if Islam Makhachev is going to win, just rush in for the takedown. Just go as hard, as wrestle heavy as you can. And you look at the stats, 93% takedown defense for Makhachev, 68% takedown offense, 3.4 takedowns average per 15 minutes. And in the striking, if you just see the differential, it's like, oh, okay, well, he's an all right striker. 2.1 strikes landed per minute. 0.76 strikes absorbed per minute. It's insane because he's normally on the ground and in total control of every fight.
This could be an amazing fight. I really think it is. And you kind of stole what I was going to say. Here's the thing for Makhachev. if he is getting the better on the feet, he isn't going to be one of these fighters who just gets trigger happy with his hands. He realizes that, yes, I can hit my opponent, but I will go for the takedown. I'm not just going to start landing shots and become a boxer overnight. He knows what he does well. Same thing with Drew Dober. This is a really fun fight, but again, I just think Makhachev... Oh, I completely forgot what I was going to say. The point that you kind of stole was that Drew Dober has Alexander Hernandez hurt. Hernandez still took him down. And yes, Drew Dober immediately gets back up to his feet. He's able to scoot his butt to the cage and get up. It's a little concerning, though, when you rock your opponent and he's still able to shoot a double leg and get you down. Now, yes, he was able to get up immediately, but that first takedown shot is concerning, especially you're fighting a guy like Makhachev, who that's what he's known for, taking his opponents down and holding them down. I like Islam a lot in this fight, and it's really his fight to lose.
1,467 total votes on Tapology, 83% Makhachev, 70% by decision. The 17% that have Dober, 72% by knockout. Adriano Martins did it. It could happen. For me, it's a pop and popcorn fight again. I know you like Makhachev a lot. For me, I'm going to enjoy it for what it's worth. I look at the odds. Makhachev opened a minus 400 favorite. He's now minus 348. Dober opened a plus 330. He's now a plus 267. The fans, the money, it's all on Makhachev right now. There's some coming in on Dober, but I've got Makhachev as well. I'm going to sit back and enjoy it because if Makhachev wins, Kevin Lee next. That's what I'm going with. I think that's probably the fight to make.
Fix your legs first, Kevin, then we'll talk. I'd like to see him fight like a Michael Chandler next. I know it's never going to happen, but that's the problem for Makhachev. Like, I do think skill-wise, let's say he beats Drew Dober. I know they're not going to give him a guy like that next, but Makhachev's had these opportunities, and he's never really been able to get one. And here's the problem for him. No one in North America really knows who he is yet because he has...
Kevin Lee.
But Kevin Lee, again, I don't think he's a top 15 guy anymore at lightweight. Like, you and Chael Sonnen...
Moved up in the rankings
You
today.
and Chael Sonnen are the only people in the world...
Brian Campbell.
Okay, the three of you are the only people who think Kevin Lee still has a title run left in him, maybe, or like still has a spot waiting for him in the top 15. I don't think Kevin Lee's that guy. I think Makhachev's going to be around a long time in the division. But this is the key point. Show up. That's all you have to do. You have to make it to Saturday night. You have to fight your opponent for 15 minutes, or maybe you can finish him earlier. That is the big fight for Islam Makhachev. Make it to Saturday. But I do think he can win if he does make it.
Matt, both of us going with Islam Makhachev to get the win. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We have 3 title fights coming up right now. So keep it locked in. As we always say with Fight Night Picks, Matt, let's get into it. Listen, Fight Night Picks today, presented as always by Manscaped. And St. Paddy's Day is for pubs, not pubes. Manscaped is a global leader for below-the-waist grooming, and they sponsored this show to ensure you give the best tools for your ball trimming experience. If you plan on getting lucky this St. Paddy's Day, then you might as well use the code FNP at manscaped.com for 20% off and free international shipping. Now, Matt, I just took a hot sauce in full... transparency.
Damn.
Took a shot of hot sauce, and that's how we ended out the show. Forgot to do the ad read, but Matt, listen, you're not going to be disappointed if you check out the Manscaped products. You're in luck because the Performance Package is the ultimate men's hygiene bundle. You can get the Weed Whacker. I use it often. I actually keep one in the shed, and I use it on air. So, listen, we're not going to break tradition. I've got it right here, out of the box.
Ooh.
I'll trim that nose hair a little bit. It's great stuff. They also include in the new package the Weed Whacker ear and nose hair trimmer, which is waterproof. It uses 9,000 RPM motor-powered 3060-degree rotary blade system. There's a light, so if you're a shower shaver like I am, it'll work very well for you. The perfect package has all sorts of great stuff in it. It also comes with the Crop Preserver Ball Deodorant. It comes with the Crop Reviver Ball Toner. There's all sorts of great stuff in that package. You can also pick up some of the cologne, which is great. And yeah, it's just overall a great package. You don't want to forget all those liquid formulations. You can also get festive and safely shave a shamrock into your pubes. There's all sorts of great stuff that you can do. And like I said, it comes with a shed travel bag as well. So, the Performance Package is the best value that Manscaped has to offer, and it's hot off the shelves. So get 20% off and free shipping with the code FNP at manscaped.com. Also, every purchase at manscaped.com goes towards contributions made to the Testicular Cancer Society to bring awareness to testicular cancer, men's health, and early cancer detection. So check them out. There's gold at the end of the rainbow with Manscaped. I just took a shot of hot sauce. It's still weighing on me. And I really do appreciate Manscaped for supporting the show. Because if you support our sponsors, it helps support us. So we do appreciate you. Manscaped.com, promo code FNP, 20% off and free international shipping. Matt, as we always say with Fight Night Picks, let's get into it. Big time fight at bantamweight for the strap. We have Petr Yan making his first title defense after winning the belt against Jose Aldo. One of the most disgusting fights if you're an MMA fan and a Legend fan. And he's taken on the guy, the Funkmaster, Aljamain Sterling, a guy representing, Sarah Longo Weidman MMA. He's been at Extreme Couture for this training camp. You see Matt Serra hanging out with him in a garage of his house, but also there's the guys from Long Island, Ali Quinta, Rob Doshvili. Maybe Matt Serra will make an appearance. And for Aljamain Sterling, the 5 on in, he's on a 5-fight win streak out of those 5. And you look at them. Big names, Brett Johns, Cody Stamann, Pedro Munoz, Corey Sandhagen, like Jimmy Rivera peppered in there too. And that was a big time win. I'm going to talk about that one more. But for Aljamain Sterling, he takes his lumps in certain fights, but he's lost to the best of competition. For Petr Yan, I mean, again, we talk of Askar Askarov, of Cyril Gane, of these fighters that I've been high on. Petr Yan was a 2018 guy. Now, if you go back and you watch his fights with ACB, we're talking about Magomedov. He's in a corner of a couple of these guys. Askar Askarov's one of them. You talk about the wins that Petr Yan has, and they're really big names. And they were big names outside the UFC. I think that's really key. This is a guy that's represented Tiger Muay Thai in the past. He's training out of ATT for this fight camp with some of the best in the world. Zaruk Adashev, they have him on the countdown. Those two guys training together. But again, you look at the loss that Petr Yan has. It's a split decision to Magomedov. Well, then he gets it back in he beats Ed Arthur, he beats Magomedov, and then he beats Mateus Matos. Another very good prospect. He comes into the UFC, knocks out Teruto Ishihara, has a decision against Jinsu San in an all-time great fight. Finishes my guy, Douglas Silva de Andrade. Fights John Dodson. Close fight, good fight, but he beats him. Beats Jimmy Rivera handily. Beats Uriah Faber, knocks him out. Beats Jose Aldo. It's been an insane run for Petr Yan because it feels like just yesterday he came into the UFC, and it feels like Aljamain Sterling's being marketed as a prospect, but he's been here for a very long time.
All right, Carlos Mencia. Listen, I like Petr Yan in this fight for a lot of different reasons, but it's really weird with the striking of Aljamain Sterling. He throws a lot of volume, but there's no power behind it whatsoever. And a lot of what his striking does, of course, is to set up the takedown because we know how good Sterling is on the mat. And if Sterling really takes down any person, I would say under 155 pounds, he has a very good chance of submitting him. Like, that's the type of ground game we're talking about when you deal with someone like Aljamain Sterling, because not only does he have the phenomenal jiu-jitsu, he has the wrestling to get the game to where he wants it to go. Because a lot of the great jiu-jitsu practitioners that we talk about, especially in MMA, well, they're good on the feet in some cases, they're great on the mat, but they lack the transition to get the fight to where they really want it. Your boy Hidalgo is a good case of that. Aljo does not have that problem. He has single leg takedowns, double leg takedowns. He can get your back from standing. He's good in the clinch. He has upper body takedowns. Like, Aljamain Sterling, there's really no safe place for him, especially in the clinch, because everything he does is so geared towards A, taking your back, and B, just getting you to the mat, which is by far his best position. This fight is going to be really interesting because Aljo, I don't know if he's fought the guys who stylistically got him all that ready for Petr Yan. Now, I understand Jimmy Rivera, to a certain degree, he will box with you and he will wrestle with you. Petr Yan does not shoot takedowns, and Jimmy Rivera, for the most part, will only headhunt. He's going to stand there, plant his feet, and throw hard. Here's the problem with Jimmy Rivera. Everyone likes to say, oh, he's a headhunter. He throws hard. How many knockouts does Jimmy Rivera have, Craig?
Not a lot.
Not a lot. He has 23 wins, and I believe only 2 of them are by TKO. You're not really a power puncher at that point. He was able to land on Aljamain Sterling. Go to the Pedro Munoz fight. Sterling does really well those first 2 rounds. He's able to land a lot of volume. But since he does have such an elevated level of volume, he does start to tire in these fights. And you saw Pedro Munoz, who looks like he's moving through water sometimes because he is a bit of a slower striker. He was starting to force the fight to Aljamain Sterling. And for Sterling, maybe it's one of those cases where he hasn't figured out where the porridge should be yet. It was too hot one fight, it was too cold another fight, and he just has to kind of meet it in the middle where he knows, okay, if I diminish my volume a little bit and I'm a little bit smarter with my shot selection, I can probably keep my output for 5 rounds. I don't deny that for a second. I just haven't seen it up until this point, and it's somewhat concerning.
This is the weird thing. So we throw those numbers up there, the strike differential, and if it's in the positive, great. If it's in the negative, we'll just watch out for it a little bit. For Petr Yan, strikes landed per minute, 6.32. Strikes against, 3.25. For Sterling, 4.82 to 1.94. Aljamain Sterling, very adept on the ground. We talked about it with Kyler Phillips. Like, you got to flow through fighting. Aljamain Sterling's one of those fighters. He can switch stances. He has that collegiate background in wrestling. He can get you down. He can get your back. He can Sulev stretch you in the same night as Zabit Magomedsharipov Sulev stretches Brandon Davis, but it was still very impressive. For Petr Yan, good from either stance, incredible boxing, and the thing that I love, and listen, you want to go with comparables. You took mine, so I'll take yours. For Aljamain Sterling, you want the comparable to the Petr Yan fight. It's probably the Jimmy Rivera fight. Good boxer, short guy. Most guys at bantamweight aren't very tall unless you're what? Like, did Cole Miller fight there?
I'm sure he probably made 135 at one point.
Like, I'm trying to think of tall people that aren't very heavy. But again, for Petr Yan, one of the more compact guys at 35. And if you want to focus on that, Sterling in the fight against Rivera runs out there in the first round and cuts the cage. In the second round, goes out, meets him in the middle, same thing in the third round. For Petr Yan, you want the comparables. I go back to the Magomedov fight, the second one, or the Matos fight that he had before he left ACB and came over to the UFC. Because what does he do against Matos? Well, he does what he did in the UFC, but he pushes a pace, pushes him up against the cage, and he'll go 1, 2, 1, and then he goes with a body kick. Or he goes straight in with a hook to the body. He uses a lot of combinations and a lot of footwork that you see more so in boxing than you do in MMA, which might contradict where he came from, coming from Tiger Muay Thai, where you'd expect maybe some more kicks. He will invest, though, in the body heavily, and that's something that I absolutely love in this fight. Mario Bautista does it. There's a few other fighters in this card that do it, but Petr Yan does it to a T. Uros Medic was another one on this card that does it very well. Head back to that prediction. But for Petr Yan, he's done it to such great effect that look at his last fight. He did these things against the guy who does it best in Jose Aldo, a guy who invests in the body so well. And for Petr Yan, again, the stance switches, the gas tank, there's so much to like, but it's the fact that he had all the 5-round experience, and Aljo does too coming into this one, but it's been a while. For Petr Yan, it's just meteoric rise. Now we're here against Aljamain Sterling, who's such a good wrestler, such a good grappler. For Sterling to win this, I would think you got to take Petr Yan down early.
Yeah, 100. Really, Craig, you think the main grappler is going to have to take down one of the best boxers in MMA?
Early.
Okay, I agree with all except for one thing you said about Jan. He's not good at switching stances until he is. He can't fight from southpaw, nor does he do it until he's forced to. We've never seen him fight from southpaw until Jose Aldo made him. And here's the wild thing about Petr Yan. He's really good in southpaw. You were right, but we had never seen it until we did, and that's the wild thing about Jan. He's such a high-level striker that even when plan A doesn't work, even when plan B doesn't work, you get rid of one of his primary weapons, which is his leg, and as a boxer, we all know, if your leg's out front, you're going to get it kicked, and if your leg's behind, you don't have a lot to push off with. Petr Yan was still able to outbox Jose Aldo, and that's such a wild fact that, yes, Jose Aldo got beat by Holloway, he got beat by McGregor. You don't go out there and just kind of slowly erode away at Jose Aldo, and that's what Petr Yan was able to do. Also, one of those underrated fights in UFC history, I really do think. Go back and watch that fight. That should have been in that fight of the year conversation. It's just the ending was so kind of gross that it got overshadowed. I do think Petr Yan needs to be recognized as one of the better boxers in MMA, though. I know we bring up the Stipes of the world, we bring up the Masvidals and the Poiriers. I think Petr Yan is right there with them, and I do think he's on that same level because, for the exact reason you had mentioned, he invests in the body, but also he's defensively sound. And a lot of the times when we talk about good boxing in MMA, we talk about guys who offensively can throw their hands a lot. For Petr Yan, he does have that kind of Yoel Romero-ish mode where he's either all defense or he's all offense. He's more than happy to stand there and let you throw a lot of strikes at him. He'll parry them, he'll move, he'll counter a little bit, and he won't explode right away. We saw that in the Jimmy Rivera fight. And then once he downloads his opponent's game plan, it's terrifying. Petr Yan marches forward like he's Jason Voorhees and just does not stop. And when he does get the kicks going to the leg, get the body shots going, get his boxing combinations in order, I don't know what you can really do to stop Petr Yan. Yes, he's going to have to eventually face one of those upper echelon wrestlers who just spams takedowns on him because we haven't seen that in the UFC up until this point. But even then, you look at the hips of Petr Yan and up until this point, how he reacts to people who shoot for takedowns. He is very Aldo-esque in the fact that the second you even try for a takedown, his hips immediately react to it. He's either all the way out or he's all the way down. He's got a beautiful sprawl, and I think that can play to his advantage. But if Aljamain Sterling's really smart, Damian Maia made a career of this. I'm going to shoot for a lazy takedown, know that you sprawl on me, and I'm going to half guard sweep you constantly. I think that's one thing that Aljamain Sterling might be able to do to catch Petr Yan off guard, which would A, let Aljo take his back, which is by far the best position he could be in this fight. But other than that one position, I have a hard time trying to figure out what other positions does Aljamain Sterling win during this fight.
It's a very interesting matchup for a whole bunch of reasons. And I mean, who had the better fight against Jimmy Rivera? Well, in the Sterling fight, Rivera couldn't keep his mouth guard in his mouth. He looked like Matt Mitrione out there, just fumbling around, or Sam Alvey, the double mouth guard. Again, with Petr Yan, though, you talk about it. I mean, he closes off the cage so well. And it's not just with his feet. You see him cut the cage with his feet, but he's always throwing feints. And he could be in orthodox, he could be in southpaw. He's always throwing a feint out there to try and stop you. And it does work. You watch these fights and you think, man, well, that's kind of stupid because he's not throwing a jab and he's not throwing any power to it. But when he keeps his hand out there, it really limits the movement of his opponent and almost does force them into the power side, whichever side it might be. UFC have him as switch. I'm going to disagree with you on the whole southpaw orthodox thing, having gone back and watched the ACB fights today of all days.
80% orthodox.
But again, in a fight like this, both guys very well versed in every aspect of MMA. Aljamain Sterling, better ground game, better wrestling. Petr Yan, better hands. But Sterling has a very, very well-adjusted and sneaky game when it's on the feet.
I agree, but I think you need to crack Petr Yan to really get his respect early on in a fight. Because if you are just throwing a lot of those pitter-patter shots, and again, Aljamain Sterling, I'm sure he does hit hard, but he's much more of a volume striker than he is a knockout puncher. Petr Yan can cut through a lot of that bullshit. Because what Aljo does is he's throwing the volume, and it stuns a lot of his opponents. Because when a lot of volume is coming their way, Cindy Dandois made a career out of this. If you're throwing punches, I'm not going to throw back because I'm more focused on trying to be defensively sound. Petr Yan is arguably the most defensively sound fighter in this division, really under 170 pounds, I'd argue, especially on the feet with his boxing. He's a very intellectual fighter, and you don't call Chris Paul the point god just because of his stats. I do think a lot of it has to do with the mindset behind Petr Yan, and the fact that, again, we talked about this, I guess, more recently, he just knows what he's good at, and I think that's really important, because for Sterling, let's say he goes out there and wins the first round based off volume. Sterling will start to strike with Yan a little bit as his confidence rises, and I think that's going to be the worst thing for him. We saw John Dodson was able to. He cracked Yan, he had him somewhat rocked, and you could tell John Dodson, oh, my confidence is there. I can strike with this guy now. But once he does start to get into the longer exchanges, that's when Petr Yan breaks him down. For Sterling, it will be weird to see what is going to be the just right amount of wrestling to striking for Sterling? Because if he just goes out there and tries to spam takedown attempts, he is going to tire himself out earlier in the fight. And we all know what's going to happen with Petr Yan. If you get tired early on in the fight, he's just going to slowly march you down and take you out. So to me, I'm really curious to see what game plan Aljo comes into this fight with. But at the end of the day, I said this, maybe it was before we started recording, I really do think Petr Yan is going to take Dominick Cruz's spot as one of the best bantamweights of all time when it's all said and done.
And this is the question with Petr Yan. Is this the Machida era at light heavyweight where, listen, we're going to win the title and then everybody gets it for a little bit of time like it's herpes? Or is Aljamain Sterling going to be able to go out there, push a pace? Does Sterling win? We have Machida era. And Petr Yan is just another good fighter that'll be around for a long time. If Yan wins this fight, I mean, that's where it gets interesting. Do you fight Dillashaw? Do you fight whoever that's out there? Do you end up fighting Cejudo that left so you could get this belt? So it makes it very interesting. Tapology, 1,471 total votes. 59% Yan, 57% by knockout. The 41% that have Sterling, 60% by submission. If we look at the odds, Petr Yan open to minus 145 for 80 for it. He's now minus 114. For Sterling, open to plus 125. He's now minus 109. The money's coming in on Sterling. The fans are almost split. What are you thinking?
I like Yan. I really do. Now, I'm not going to deny, I do think these are the two best bantamweights in the division. I really do. I think the fact that Aljamain Sterling was able to submit Corey Sandhagen and the impressive fashion.
It wasn't a fluke.
No, it wasn't. That's just how good his ground game is. You don't get a Suluev stretch and a sub-minute rear naked choke against the other number one contender by being kind of okay at grappling. Aljamain Sterling is at that level, and I do think if he only gets one takedown in this fight, Petr Yan is in a whole world of trouble. The issue is, I just don't know how he gets that takedown. I think it's going to be really hard for him to close the distance during this fight, because let's say he does throw a lot of volume, Petr Yan's great at slipping punches too, and if he's able to duck under one of those and crack Aljamain Sterling with an overhand, we saw Marlon Moraes was able to drop Aljo with an overhand before he was able to drop him with a kick, of course, and knock him out. But it's a strike that Aljo's been caught with in the past, and I just think the boxing technique and the overall power of Yan is going to be the difference in this fight.
Matt, both of us going with Petr Yan to get the win, to keep the belt. We're really looking forward to this. 2 more title fights left. You have Anderson challenging Nunes. You have the man himself, Israel Adesanya, moving up a weight class, but will he? Taking on Jan Blachowicz. Really looking forward to the card. Keep locked in with Fighting Picks, Matt, as we always say. Let's get into it. Now, there's an old movie out there where a small deer's mother gets killed, and then he has to make friends with a rabbit. And in that movie, the rabbit says, if you can't say something nice, don't say nothing at all. Amanda Nunes is taking on Megan Anderson. Matt, I'm going to talk about the odds quickly because this is not normally how we do fights. Thanks for tuning in. Amanda Nunes opened a minus 1,000 favorite in this fight. She's minus 1162 average on best fight odds. Megan Anderson plus 700 thereabouts. Now, if you look at the Tapology votes, 93% of voters have Nunes to win, and 59% have her to win by knockout. Everybody in the world, except for Megan Anderson's friends, family, and Jim, have Amanda Nunes to win. So, I'm going to do a reverse switch, because if I was really confident in a pick, normally I talk about Amanda Nunes winning, she's the GOAT, this and that. I will take an opposite stance here. Now, does that have any reflection on my vote? Possibly not. But Megan Anderson comes into this fight, and before she even came into the UFC, this was the boogie woman. This was the featherweight that was going to crack it all. She was going to beat Chris Cyborg. She was going to be, bring this resurgence, or I wouldn't even say resurgence, just a surgence into this featherweight division that the UFC created. So she comes in and she beat Charmaine Tweet, and she beat Peggy Morgan, and she beat Amanda Bell, and she beat Amber Leibrock that's in Bellator, and she lost to Cindy Dandois 6 years ago, but that happened. She comes into the UFC and fights Holly Holm at 145 pounds. She gets outworked by Holly Holm. She gets out-grappled. That'll happen. She fights Kat Zingano, kicks her in the eyelid, cut her eyelid, and the fight was ended, and it was weird. But a good win. She loses to Felicia Spencer, where she was a big favorite. She gets submitted early, but that'll happen. And then she beats Zara Farron, and she beats Norma Dumont. Now, Matt, Norma Dumont has since... She was 4-0 coming into that fight. We have to say that. She's since gone to bantamweight and had a good fight against Ashley Evans Smith. Norma Dumont is better than her record would tell you, and especially at 135 pounds. Zara Farron lost to Megan Anderson, and then she lost to Felicia Spencer, and we haven't seen her since. Megan Anderson and Felicia Spencer are the only good fighters at featherweight not named Amanda Nunes. This division is awful. Megan Anderson, very long, very tall. You're going to hear that all week. This is the biggest fighter that Amanda Nunes has ever fought. Jermaine Durandamy's pretty big, but we'll forget about that. Megan Anderson, biggest fighter that she's ever fought. So, Megan Anderson has the odds stacked against her, the fan vote stacked against her, Tapology stacked against her, Casey Kenney stacked against her, and really, it's a tough ask to beat, well, the best women's fighter ever. She's got a nice right cross, she throws decent kicks, and her clinch game isn't awful.
Yes, it is. I'm sorry, that's where I'm going to have to stop you. You can lose to Holly Holm, but here's the thing. You can't lose to Holly Holm by getting out-grappled and out-single-leg takedown.
If you don't have nothing to say, don't say it at all.
No. Here's the thing. She made it to a decision with Holly Holm. I wouldn't be able to do that. Good job, Megan. You're fighting one of the greatest fighters of our generation, though, who doesn't have a weakness in their game. And that's
right now.
Oh, my bad.
Used to. Right now, it's pretty good.
Exactly, because there used to be this narrative that, well, Amanda gets tired, and if she fights a good wrestler, how will she do?
Well, Joe Rogan's going to say that.
Well, exactly. I've got the answers for you. Basically, between 2016 and right now, she does amazing, and there's no weakness whatsoever. And if you're really good at striking, well, guess what? She's equally good at grappling. And if you're really good at grappling, well, guess what? She can keep the fight on the feet and absolutely beat the brakes off you. And the wild thing about Amanda Nunes is she's kind of gotten to this point where if you're a specialist, she can beat you at what you specialize in and everything else. Like Felicia Spencer, look how good of a grappler she is. If this fight hits the mat, Nunes is in real danger. Nunes took down Felicia Spencer and ground and pounded her and beat her up on the feet for the entirety of the fight, and there wasn't even a second that I don't think Felicia Spencer won.
But Matt, she didn't finish her.
She did not finish her.
Because Felicia Spencer's tough.
But here's the thing. She probably should have, though. Like, there was an insane amount of damage being dealt out in that fight, and yes, the last two fights from Nunes have not been finishes. I fully expect to finish this Saturday, and I'm not saying anything bad against Megan Anderson. I'm just really going to pump the tires of Amanda Nunes. Her boxing is very, very good. She lands her punches at the end of her shots, which is a phenomenal thing, really, for anyone to do. And you don't see a lot in MMA. Like, the McGregors of the world do it, the Poiriers, like the high-level strikers do it. You just don't see it all the time. And the fact that Amanda Nunes, she has such great power, really good long-distance strikes. She has a great kicking game that she's really developed throughout this title run because before that Holly Holm fight, here's the thing. I knew Amanda Nunes is going to win. You were pretty heavily favoring Amanda Nunes as well. But we both fully expected her. Well, she's a good wrestler. Holly Holm isn't. She's got a black belt. You guys can read what we were reading. She head kicked Holly Holm just like Holly Holm did to Ronda Rousey. That's absurd. And the fact that, okay, on the feet, you're constantly in danger against Nunes. On the mat, she has that black belt. She has phenomenal ground and pound. And now that her cardio is 5-round ready no matter what, where she can not only fight for a full 5 rounds, she can keep a very elevated pace throughout those 5 rounds. There's just not a lot of chinks in the armor of Amanda Nunes. And Megan Anderson is a good fighter, and I think she's probably the third best women's featherweight in the UFC right now. I'd probably put her behind Felicia Spencer.
That wasn't nice.
sorry. She's probably the third best women's featherweight, not the third worst.
In the world or in the UFC?
In the UFC. I definitely think there's some people at Bellator who would give her a run for her money, but that's a conversation for another time. This is a hard win for Megan Anderson, and I do understand that if you want to have a 145 belt, you're going to have to find contenders at a certain point, but they should just get rid of the division. And it's unfortunate to say because it will kind of take away half of what makes Amanda Nunes so special. Amanda's finished everyone at 145. Other than, okay, Jermaine Durandamy, that fight was at 135. The Felicia Spencer fight wasn't even close. She didn't finish her, but it was such a one-sided beatdown. Now you're fighting Megan Anderson, who lost to Felicia Spencer in a very one-sided fight. She herself got out-grappled by Felicia Spencer, and now you're telling me that she's going to be able to beat the greatest women's fighter I've ever seen. It's a tough task.
Everybody's got a puncher's chance. Everybody's also got a hungry heart.
Everybody's got a price, everybody's got to pay, but the $1 million man always gets his way.
Yeah, this is a really tricky one, fans out there. I don't know. I mean, here, Amanda Nunes was supposed to fight Megan Anderson back in December. Nunes pulled out. Why?
She had a kid.
Well, she didn't.
Here's the thing. The only reason that Megan Anderson might win, and I don't even think this will be it, if Amanda Nunes is not motivated at all for this fight.
Seems it.
If being a mom is just so much better than fighting, and I'm sure it probably is, don't get me wrong, but unless that is what her whole focus is on, I don't see how Megan Anderson beats her. The lack of a ground game of Anderson really does hurt her, and it's not the fact that, she has a poor ground game. There's not much one there to begin with, and if Nunes does decide, I'm just going to take her down, I fully expect a submission in the first round.
Matt, going with Amanda Nunes, I think it goes without saying. I just want to take a different approach because it's not fun to be one-sided. So Megan Anderson, good right cross. You saw that against Norma Dumont. Good fight against Zara Farron where she just totally outdid her everywhere. And that height for height and size for size, Zara Farron's a pretty big featherweight. But overall, I mean, Amanda Nunes is that 5-tool player. And again, unless she just doesn't show up, then I think she should be able to get the win. Going with Amanda Nunes.
I couldn't agree more.
Matt, we're really looking forward to our main event of the evening. We have Jan Blachowicz taking on Israel Adesanya. We're going to be a lot more critical in that one as we were in all 13 other fights that were on this card. So check them out if you haven't. Check out that main event breakdown coming up here shortly. And keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, Matt, Fight Night Picks.
Let's get into it.
Big time main event, holy smokes. UFC 259 for the light heavyweight belt. We have the champ and the new champ, Jan Blachowicz, representing Poland with that Polish power, taking on Nigeria and New Zealand's own Israel Adesanya, the last stylebender. The guy is arguably the biggest star in the sport. We are just witnessing greatness here. At Craig Allen FNP on Twitter and Instagram. You can find me there at Matt Allen FNP on those same social channels. And we're looking forward to this fight for a few different reasons. Question mark kicks before the prelims. It's always 2 hours before. We get to offer up our final picks and predictions. Maybe somebody missed weight. Maybe somebody had a bad weight cut or a bad week in general. You get an opportunity to recap everything. And if we're changing...
Did you have a good week?
If we're changing our minds, we'll see what happens there. But we also have the pay-per-view fight companion here on the channel. Look for those links to drop later on in the week. But Matt, our featured fight at 205 pounds... And that's the thing. We have Jan Blachowicz, a career guy. He's had some fights at heavyweight. He's fought at light heavyweight. Big guy for the division, taking on the man moving up, who's 20-0, just beat Paulo Costa. And he just said today with ESPN and with Ariel Helwani that he's going to weigh in maybe around 193 pounds. Don't think that bodes well for him. He's had kickboxing fights kind of all over the map. Had one that was at heavyweight in the past. He's fought big kickboxing names too over with Glory. I know you're going to mention some of them later on, but if you look at Israel Adesanya, he is buzzed through a level of competition that's absolutely insane. I know the fight against Yoel Romero might not have been the best fight, but it's still a big name, and he defended takedowns from one of the best wrestlers that we've ever seen at middleweight. So kudos to Israel Adesanya. You've come a long way since you beat Rob Wilkinson in your debut. All sorts of performance bonuses for him. I mean, 9 total fights in the UFC, 7 bonuses, 5 performance, 2 fight of the nights. Kelvin Gastelum, where you at, bud? And for Jan Blachowicz, 6 bonuses so far, 5 performance, 1 fight of the night. He had a rough start, and he hasn't looked back ever since. The 5 on in, 4-1. The 1 loss, it's a tricky one. We're talking about Thiago Santos 2 years ago, but since then, Luke Rockhold, Jacare Souza, Corey Anderson, Bellator's own, and Dominick Reyes' last time out. Man, has Jan Blachowicz looked good.
He's a great example of a fighter who just never really gave up on themselves. And I know I'm going to sound a little Robin Blackie, but let's be honest, Jan Blachowicz, his career trajectory is a lot closer to a Michael Bisping than it is to an Israel Adesanya. Like, he's paid his dues. He's won, he's lost, and he's always come back better. And that's the great thing about Jan Blachowicz. If you beat him, you're not going to be able to beat him the same way again. He's kind of like Doomsday, the superhero, that way, where even if you kill him, you got to find a new way to do it the next time. Because Blachowicz, I think, in that Thiago Santos fight, did learn a very big lesson. And yes, he was on a bit of a run before that, which led him up to that main event, of course, but he went into that fight expecting Santos to be the aggressor. Santos was not the aggressor. Santos drew Blachowicz into his power. Jan Blachowicz paid for that mistake. He goes in wild in that third round. We all remember what happens. Beautiful hook from Santos, ground and pound finish. Jan Blachowicz, his chin is phenomenal. I know Santos knocked him out, but this man eats bricks pretty much in all of his fights, and it doesn't really seem to faze him. Go back and look at the rematch of the Jimmy Manuwa fight. Phenomenal fight, by the way. One of the better fights of that year. He drops Manuwa early on, eats a flush head kick from Jimmy Manuwa in the second round, though, and just kind of keeps on walking forward in that classic Polish power kind of way. I just really like what Jan Blachowicz brings to the cage, because I don't want to say he's the perfected version of an Ally Quinta, but if you're a really good grappler, he's a good enough grappler to get you off of him and force you to become a striker. And if you're a really good striker, he's a good enough grappler to do the opposite to you and take you down.
And if you're Nikita Krylov, he'll just do everything.
Exactly, and that Nikita Krylov fight, for me, I always liked Jan Blachowicz. I gotta be honest, I've sort of been a fan of his just because I like how goofy he is. Like, he's not who you think of as, wow, he's one of like the baddest dudes in the world. He goes, hoo hoo, and he's just real happy all the time. But in that fight, I was like, okay, this is gonna be a tough one. You don't really know what you're gonna get from Blachowicz. And every time that you think that this guy's going to lose, he keeps on adding a new wrinkle to his game. The Corey Anderson rematch is another example. He always does better the second time around because he learns from his mistakes, and not enough MMA fighters do that. If Sarah McMahon had Jan Blachowicz just mindset, she'd be champion. But the fact that Jan Blachowicz, he's not afraid to go back to the gym and realize what he's not doing well, and he's not afraid to fix what he isn't doing well. Look at the Dominick Reyes fight compared to some of the other fights he's had in the past. Jan used to get a little tentative, especially with his strikes and his kicks, because it's not that his ground game's bad, but off his back, he's not great at getting back up. You can see that in the Gustafsson fight. Gustafsson, who himself isn't the best grappler, but he was able to just really pound away at Jan Blachowicz from inside of his guard. Blachowicz had mentioned, even in the Jacare fight, I was so worried about the takedown. I didn't really want to get taken down. I know I'm a good grappler, but against a guy like Jacare, you really got to be tentative. Against Dominick Reyes, I don't know if finally the belt was for the line, like the stakes were high enough for Jan Blachowicz to really let everything go, but he looked phenomenal, and he looked great in every aspect of MMA. He let his kicks go. He let his hands go. He was sound defensively. He just showed you everything that you really want to see from a title-winning performance.
And if you look at Jan Blachowicz, and I thought, like, this was the black ace, like, I knew something that nobody else did. He's been training with boxing star and KSW heavyweight Izu Ugono, who's 1-0 in MMA, just had that big win with KSW last year. 18-2 in boxing, and he had a big fight against Dominic Brazil that, well, he lost, and it'll happen. But he's a great guy to try and get your striking ready for a fight with Dominick Reyes, for a fight like Israel Adesanya, to get ready for these strikers. If you look at Jan Blachowicz for part and parcel what he's worth, good grappling, good defensive wrestling, he can be offensive if he needs to, really high stance, really heavy on his legs. He throws nice kicks. You saw that in the fight against Reyes where he just kept hammering away and it looked disgusting, and then he finishes him with his hands. With Israel Adesanya, it's going to be really difficult to try and get at him. And that's the thing, because Adesanya has such a good idea of range. He really gets himself out there early and figures it out. And the one thing that I worried about in the Paulo Costa fight, it's the same thing with Blachowicz. When's Costa going to be able to close distance, start to land on Adesanya? We've seen him, Adesanya, backed up against the cage. If Costa gets you back there, you're in trouble. Yoel Romero was in trouble when he fought him. So you worried about it. Adesanya comes in, and I'm not being a hipster. We can all talk about it. The pec thing. I saw it as soon as Adesanya started to walk into the cage. I thought, well, that's not good. Like, I thought it was torn, right? So I figure if you've got a torn pec, you're not going to be throwing that hand. It's going to hurt.
You sent me so many texts about this.
I did. It was real.
No.
It wasn't like, oh, man, I got on this after. So I figured, okay, this isn't good. And then Adesanya goes out there and he just starts kicking. He doesn't start throwing punches. And I thought, oh, boy, this is bad. Like, Costa's going to be able to just crash in and hit him. What happens? Adesanya's such a good kicker. He just kick. And then really in the end of it, you're hammering away. But it wasn't like Alexander Semin when he was in the NHL, just kind of raining punches and he was in pain. It was fine. So for me, Do I worry about the gyno a little bit? Maybe, but I don't place as much emphasis on it as I did before. And when it really comes down to it, Jan Blachowicz, so well-rounded, such a big guy in this division too. I mean, he's going to be shorter, he's given up reach, but thickness is a real thing, and it affects people at light heavyweight.
Can't teach thickness.
You can't teach thickness. You can't teach height either. So it's a tricky fight. I am eager to see if Adesanya was just joking and he actually comes in at like 204. Because we've seen him at 183 before. We haven't seen a light heavyweight move up from middleweight and weigh in light since
Dan Henderson against Daniel Cormier. And that was a weird performance because Daniel Cormier is as big of a light heavyweight as you could possibly get. And he was basically fighting a middleweight. And what was the result of that fight? I mean, there's a picture there that you guys can't see, but some of the greatest highlights really of DC's career. I do expect Adesanya to come up light, and you would say that it's a negative, but I actually look at it completely different. If you're fighting a wrestler, yes, it would be a negative because they would have the weight advantage and they can wear on you. I don't think Jan Blachowicz is going to shoot a lot of takedowns in this fight. I really don't. I think he might get into trouble and panic wrestle, but when you're panic wrestling, it's not like that was a part of your game plan going into it. It's like, oh shit, I'm kind of stunned. This is what I'm going to go for. For Adesanya, the feints that he does use, and that was the big thing for Costa. I know Costa said 1 bottle of wine, 2 bottles of wine, then you show up to a title fight hungover. But Adesanya just froze him because he constantly made Paulo Costa think he was going to strike. If you look at the way Adesanya moves, you're like, oh, that's a professional athlete. Then you look at the way Jan Blachowicz moves, and you're like, damn, that man needs a massage. But they're both equally effective, and that's why MMA is such a wild and crazy sport, because although they are both primary strikers, and I would say similar levels of success. I understand Adesanya's the favorite. He's the one moving up, but you don't become champion by accident. It's just the way in which they do strike is so polar opposite.
For Jan Blachowicz, he just had a birthday. Happy birthday, Jan Blachowicz. Just turned 38. Just had a child, or his wife did. So congrats to him, or fiance. You see them on the countdown. So congrats to Jan Blachowicz. For Israel Adesanya, he does weird stuff in videos with his dogs, and now he's in a big fight. And this is the biggest fight of his life. And again, I've long considered, and that's weird to say because he's only had 9 fights in the UFC, this guy is your superstar. Like, this is the next John Jones. This is the next George St. Pierre. This is your guy right here at the Last Stylebender. So whether you like him or not, he's going to be around for a long time. And even if he loses this fight, he still has a belt at 185 pounds.
Oh, 100%. And the wild thing about Adesanya, too, is it's not like the UFC fed him a lot of easy opponents. Like, you don't knock out Robert Whittaker, beat Yoel Romero, and beat Paulo Costa the way that he did without having the hype be justified. Like, I think at this point, it is fair to say, like, Stylebender is what you think he is. He is the best striker in the UFC. Whether you want to admit that or not. He's the most dynamic guy. He can strike from both stances. Like, we've never seen a striker like this in MMA before. And that's just the truth. And people want to say, well, Anderson Silva or whatever. Silva, for his time, yes, he was very much ahead of it. Israel Adesanya, it's like he's the next evolution of what basketball is. Like, basketball went from post play to 3-pointers. Who knows what's going to be next? Well, right now, Adesanya...
half-court shots.
Exactly. Adesanya's shooting threes from the logo, and Jan Blachowicz is still very much kind of that regular modern version of a fighter. He just does everything fairly well, and I do think you're going to have to be that wrestling specialist to beat Adesanya. That's not much of a hot take, and people are going to say, oh, well, he fought Yoel and he beat him. Yoel barely wrestled in that fight. I really do think he's going to have to fight one of those pressure wrestlers where that's going to be his only game plan, and he's not going to play the striking game at all. Because if you're a striker, even if you're a great striker like Robert Whittaker, who's a 9.999 out of 10 in striking, well, Adesanya's that 10, and unless you are on his level, which not many people in the world are, you're going to have a very hard time trying to strike with him, even in MMA. And last point for me on Adesanya, he's not just a kickboxer. He is an MMA kickboxer now. He has the takedown defense. He has the cardio. He has some of the grappling now to where it's not as easy as, oh, I can just go take him down and I can beat him. You need more than that. Jan Blachowicz is extremely well-rounded, and I think you're going to need a fighter like him to beat Adesanya. I just think at the age of 38, being a little bit slower like Blachowicz is, he does rely on his power a little bit, let's be honest. He has great technique, but he's not the fastest guy in the world. It's going to be really hard to knock out Adesanya if you can't hit him. And between his truck movement and his footwork, it's going to be really hard for Blachowicz to land. And if Adesanya is just feint, you can draw out big reactions from Jan Blachowicz. The fact that he has gotten to a title by reacting like that to feints is somewhat surprising, but I do think that just speaks to how good Jan Blachowicz must be.
And the other interesting point about these two guys, because again, Jan Blachowicz didn't get here by accident, but he's he's the type of guy that he can follow you and he moves in a straight line. He reminds me of a friend that I had growing up that had a man's body in grade 7 and was a competitive hockey player until everybody figured him out because he could only go in a straight line and he couldn't stop and he couldn't turn. So Jan Blachowicz, very much like my friend. For Israel Adesanya, again, he is that next evolution. If Jan Blachowicz is like Shane Battier, well, then Israel Adesanya is like John Collins. So you can look at it that way. Now, I like John Collins, and I don't love the Hawks. But for Israel Adesanya, the next evolution, I think the side-to-side movement is really going to help him out in this fight. I do like Adesanya. So let's have a look at the Tapology votes where it gets interesting, Matt. 65% of 1,500 on the dot have Adesanya to win. Majority have him to win by knockout, 61%. For the 35% that have Blachowicz, 78% have him to win by knockout. If we look at the odds, Blachowicz open a plus 210. He's now at a plus 189. And for Adesanya, open minus 250. He's now minus 235. The people have Adesanya. Matt, do you have Adesanya?
I have a question for you, then I'll give my prediction.
Is it a basketball question?
No, it's MMA. Okay. How many takedowns does Jan Blachowicz attempt in this fight? Does he attempt more or less than 5?
3.
3, okay. I think he needs more of that if he's going to win this fight. If he doesn't shoot at least 5 takedowns, I don't know how he beats Israel Adesanya.
Do you think training primarily with Izu Ogono helps out with your takedowns?
No, but I think the black belt in jiu-jitsu probably does. And the fact that Jan Blachowicz has a lot of fights that I can go back and watch. And he is a great grappler. It's just weird. He doesn't have athleticism. Jan Blachowicz, he's just slow. He's great. Don't get me wrong. I'm a big Jan Blachowicz guy. He just, you don't look at him and think like, wow, that's one of the baddest fighters in the world. Like, he doesn't move like you would really expect.
Well, if you listen to his rope story, he is.
If you listen to the rope story, one of the more intense stories out there. I doubt Adesanya has anything close to that.
They put that in embedded.
The man wears a wristband.
Anyway.
Okay. I think Adesanya's going to win. Not only do I think he's going to win, I think he's going to win by question mark kick. And the only reason I'm confident about that, and I know, I don't say this often where I give the method, but lately I've been doing okay with it, so I feel somewhat confident.
It's the name of one of our shows.
Anyways. Jan Blachowicz bites on feints, and he does drop that right hand quite a bit. My issue is Adesanya throws a ton of question mark kicks. Just look back at the Paulo Costa fight. That's how he set up the finish. Was Costa was leaning, it set up the question mark kick after he'd invested so heavily in the leg kicks. Well, Jan Blachowicz isn't the fastest guy in the world. Adesanya, he's not Usain Bolt, but in MMA, he's one of the faster guys around. So if he is able to chop down at that leg, get the right hand of Blachowicz to drop by feigning the jab, it's just going to set up one of those beautiful question mark kicks. And will it put him away? Maybe not, but that technique will land, and it's going to land hard throughout this fight. I expect Adesanya to win, and that's when it gets interesting. Does he stay at 205? Does he call out John Jones? Does he try to fight Stipe? Like, who really knows what Adesanya's going to do next? You just know that there's going to be a lot of eyes attached to it.
Matt, I'm really looking forward to the fight, and I'm in agreement with you as well. Both of us going with Nigeria and New Zealand's own Israel Adesanya to win the title, to become the double champ. And if we get it wrong, we're donkeys, but I'm really looking forward to this fight. And Jan Blachowicz, credit where credit's due, multiple paths to victory, and if he wants to grapple, that's where it gets interesting. So I'm really looking forward to it. We both have Adesanya. Make sure you check out Fight Night Picks question mark kicks on Saturday, as well as the Fight Companion. You can find the votes for question mark kicks at Fight Night Picks over on Instagram. We'll be busy on there and Twitter as the week goes on. So keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt. As we always say, let's get into it.